Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
Ariana lived in a small village raised by her mother and father. She had always watched how a woman cared for a man, how she supported him when he was not well. The girl always knew that she too would have a big family. She would get married, have children. Her husband would build her a house, and there they will be very happy. Ariana, what are you thinking about again? Her mother told her. I was thinking how lucky you and Daddy are. She looked at the woman with her clear blue eyes. Yes, I am very lucky to have your father. Her mother came up to her and hugged her. The woman had always wanted to have a big family, to have many children. But God didn't give her that. After she gave birth to Ariana, she got sick and never got pregnant again. Here I am, my father came into the house. Daddy, the girl ran to him. The whole family gathered around the table. It was their tradition. There they talked, told each other about what had happened during the day. Mom, tell me how to choose someone who will love you and always support you. Ariana asked and turned to her mother. At that moment, the girl was 12 years old. You know, daughter, when you meet him, your heart will tell you that he is the one. Her mother sighed and moved closer to her father. I want so much to meet someone like you, Daddy, Ariana confessed to him. You will, at your age, the father grinned. The daughter only smiled back. She trusted her parents. She went to school. Every day they went there with the boys. Afterwards, if it was warm outside, they would go for a walk, always inventing something. In the winter, they'd ride their briefcases down the hill. It was fun. When Ariana was 15 years old, she decided that she had 1 year left before graduating from high school and needed to think about where she was going to go. Will you go to the city? Her mother asked her. Even if I go, then I will go back, told her daughter. Come back. There is a lot of work here. People need bread, her father told her. Ariana planned to become a bookkeeper or a cashier. She was very attracted to numbers, and she knew how to handle them. But fate turned a little differently. When the girl was in the 10th grade, she met, as it seemed to her, the very man who would be with her always as she dreamed. That day, she was leaving school, tripped on the wooden porch, and flew forward. If she had fallen, her knees and elbows would have definitely had to heal. But she was picked up by someone's strong arms. She turned around, her heart pounding frantically in her chest, and the guy was looking at her and smiling. Her long braids reached almost to the ground as she hung in his arms. Thank you so much, she said and blushed. Can you imagine what would have happened to you if you'd fallen? He looked at the ground near the porch. There was a lot of rubble. Yes, when I stumbled, I had already imagined what would happen and how my mother would scold me. Now they were both laughing. Ariana was on her feet, adjusting her uniform. Are you going home? The young man asked her. Yes, she said and walked down the road. Wait, I'll walk you out. He caught up with her in 2 steps. Where are you from here? I've never seen you before, the girl asked him. My parents recently moved here. I was in the army, so I came here. I didn't want to leave them alone. I need to help with the house and garden, he said. Oh, so your parents are our new neighbors? She guessed. About a year ago, a family moved in, a family with whom Ariana's mother was on good terms. I guess, and you're Ariana? He asked her. Yes, she laughed back. And my name is Harvey. At first, he wanted to extend his hand to her, but then he thought it would be awkward since only men do that. They walked further to their houses, which did stand in the neighborhood. Harvey promised that they would come to visit them in the evening. I have to ask my parents, she said. What to ask? We will visit you in the neighborhood. They often come to us. He was surprised. Okay, come on, see you later. She waved to him and went into the gate. Her face was burning, her heart was beating fast, and her mother noticed at once that something was wrong with her daughter. Ariana, what happened to you? Why are you like this? She asked her from the doorstep. Mom, I met him today, she told her. Who him? The woman didn't understand. Well, the one, remember you told me that when I met him, I would feel it in my heart. And so today, when I almost fell, he caught me, said the daughter confusedly. I don't understand anything. Sit down at the table, have lunch. Then you will tell everything in order. Showed her mother that everything is already ready. Ariana ate. She went to her room. For some reason, she wanted to write a poem. The girl sat down at her desk, wrote the first 2 lines, and then nothing else came into her head. In the evening, as promised, Harvey and his parents came. The woman was glad to see them. She let them in, and they sat down at the table. Harvey's mother baked a very tasty potato pie. Everyone ate it with tea. And then the guy offered the girl to go outside and take a little walk. That evening they walked around the village, talking about everything for a very long time. "Harvey, did you notice that when you caught me between us, as if there was a spark?" Ariana said to him, although she was ashamed of these words. "You wouldn't believe it. I was far away from that place, but it was like I felt something and I was drawn there." They stopped. "Will you come tomorrow?" she asked him hopefully. "Will we be friends?" It was obvious that the guy was also embarrassed. After these words, Ariana was not so much shy of the young man anymore. He walked her to the gate, where his parents were coming out. They all said goodbye and went home. "Mom, did you see him?" Ariana said to the woman. "Yes, of course I did, and I saw the way you look at him and how his eyes shine." She kissed her on the top of her head. Ariana continued to study. Harvey met her after school every day, walked her home. In the evening, they would walk and talk about the future. "I was going to go to the city after school," she told him. "What's there to do in the city?" The guy didn't understand. "I don't know. Everyone wants to go there. And I also wanted to, of course. Then I promised my mom to come back." For some reason now she was ashamed of these words. "I won't change your mind. If you want to go, I'll follow you. But I think there'll be plenty of work here." He pointed to the office. "I know that without you," Ariana thought. When she was home that evening, she asked her mother if she could talk to Aunt Selena, who worked at the village hall. Maybe she could get her a job somewhere. Her mother, of course, promised that she would do it, but first she had to wait until the educational process was over. Before the exams, the girl was very worried, but Harvey was always there for her. He studied together with her, and some things prompted where he helped. Ariana already knew everything, and when everything happened, she was not even worried. "You're going to be my wife," Harvey whispered discreetly in her ear at graduation. Ariana's cheeks flared. She turned sharply toward him. "What are you talking about?" She also whispered quietly. "Why? We are adults. Why not register our relationship?" He was amazed that she didn't want to do that. "But you have to wait a little bit, because I'm not old enough yet," she told him. "I'm willing to wait my whole life for you." He hugged her. After high school, Ariana got a part-time job at the post office. She enjoyed sorting through newspapers and magazines and delivering letters to the locals. She was on good terms with everyone, never being rude to anyone, smiling. Harvey was glad his girlfriend was like that. When she turned 18, he and Kolia fulfilled their dream. At the wedding, the whole village was celebrating. "My dears, though you are still so young, but I congratulate you." My mother was crying for some reason. "Mommy, why tears in her eyes?" "Today is such a happy day," Ariana told her. It was just a happy day. Everyone was happy, having a good time. Before the wedding, Harvey had asked the chairman for a plot of land for a house, and now he was building it. The boy wanted the house to be big, strong, just like their family would be. Ariana had gone to work in the morning as usual. She was sitting in a semi-dark room and going through letters when she felt the heaviness in her stomach. The girl immediately thought of a baby, although no one had ever told her about it. When her older co-worker came in, she decided to ask her, "Juliana, tell me, here I have a pulling in my stomach. Can it be pregnancy?" she asked the woman. "Well, Ariana, you give just a stomach pain, and she immediately thinks she is pregnant," laughed the woman. But the girl was sure of it. She wanted children so much that she couldn't believe that it didn't work out. At home, she told her husband everything, he, as well as Julianne, with disbelief at the words of his wife. But when a few months passed, Ariana's words were confirmed. She was indeed pregnant. It was such happiness, but this child was not destined to be born. One day, Ariana was walking to one of the houses for work, and Evan rode by on a cart. For some unknown reason, the horse spurred and sped off. Ariana was in its path. Evan, as best he could, didn't want to hurt the girl, but he failed. She didn't realize how it happened, but a moment later, the girl was lying unconscious on the side of the road. "You killed the girl. You killed the girl." Evan shouted. He still couldn't stop the mad horse. The people who heard this immediately ran that way. They saw the girl, started to lift her up, and took her to a doctor. The local medical center couldn't do anything, so they took her to the hospital. Yes, she lost the baby, but that wasn't the most important thing right now. Tell me, what's wrong with her? Harvey begged tearfully. She has very serious injuries. The doctor at the hospital couldn't say anything clear yet. She needs time, patience, and good care. I will do anything for her. The husband was really ready for it. After the conversation with the doctor, he sat in the ward and never left his wife's side. Her mother came to visit, her father visited, but her husband was always there for her. When Ariana regained consciousness, he fed her from a spoon, helped her to get up. She was so sweet and small and beautiful. Ariana's face had taken a bit of a beating in the fall, and now there was a large scar on one cheek. But it seemed to Harvey that this scar only made her prettier. He complimented her and encouraged her in everything, but she just smiled and covered her face. They returned to the village a few months later. Ariana limped, but no one noticed. At night, the girl cried. "Come on, my darling." Harvey stroked her head. "Harvey, what about our baby? That's what hurt the most." "We'll have more children, don't worry." He could always support her with a kind word. After a while, the girl realized that her dream of a big family might not come true because they had been married for almost 10 years and she could not get pregnant. The consequences of the accident were almost gone. There was only a big scar on her face. But the girl thought that's why she couldn't have a child. "I guess I'll go to town," she told him. "What are you going to do there?" Her husband asked her, even though he knew why she was going there. "I want to go to the doctor to find out why I can't get pregnant." Her mother came to the house. "There's nothing for you to do there in this town," she said. "Then what?" Ariana was getting desperate. "So today you and I will go to your grandmother Jessica's house in the neighboring village," her mother told her and took her daughter's hand to support her. "What can she do, your Jessica?" Ariana really didn't believe that some otherworldly force could help her get pregnant. She remembered that a few years ago, her husband had told her about a baby from the orphanage, but she didn't want to think about it yet. Ariana agreed with her mother, and together they drove to a neighboring village. It was indeed said about Jessica that she healed people, helped them in different life situations. The woman and the girl entered the house. Ariana immediately saw Jessica sitting at the table. She wasn't that old, though everyone called her a grandmother. "So what took you, wench, so long to come to me?" she asked her. "I don't know," the girl was confused. "Come on, come in, I'll solve your problem." The grandmother took out some herbs, whispered something on them, smoked them, gave Ariana to drink some tincture. After that, she said that everything would be all right. Ariana left Jessica's grandmother. She looked at her mother and smiled. "So, did she help you?" The woman spent the whole time outside the house. Yep, just like that, they were coming home. Harvey was looking forward to it. He still loved his wife and was willing to do anything for her. A year passed, 2, 3, 5. There was no change in their family. One day, Ariana decided to make glass. She added bread and breadcrumbs to the container, and when she began to add the leaven, she felt so bad that she had to run outside. "What's wrong?" Her husband ran out to help her. "I don't know, it got so bad." She looked at him. Harvey saw that Ariana was very pale. "Why don't we go to the medic?" He suggested she go. When they arrived, the man who was supposed to help Ariana smiled. "Well, Ariana, your dreams have come true," he told her. Everyone in the village knew how much she wanted children and that she couldn't do it. It couldn't be. Ariana almost fainted. Indeed, she was pregnant. Harvey carried his wife in his arms. Now he wouldn't let her go anywhere. She couldn't even go to the store. He did everything for her. They went to the hospital before the appointed time. Everything had to be perfect. The whole pregnancy, the woman felt good. Nothing was going to happen. She was sure of it. Her stomach started to feel tight in the evening. Ariana told the doctor she was looking forward to meeting her firstborn. When the baby's cry sounded in the room, the doctor congratulated Ariana on the birth of her baby, her son. The woman lay and cried. After that, she did not leave the baby for a minute. When they returned home, the whole village celebrated the event. "Now I am the happiest person in the world," she told Harvey. There was a lot of crying in the house. But Mom was always there. She had waited so long for this moment that she tried to stretch the time while the baby was small. Ariana loved to sit by the crib and tell stories and poems to the baby. When she heard the mother's voice, she would quiet down. After the birth of her first child, not even a year passed before Ariana felt sick again. She turned to her husband, looked at him with big eyes. "It can't be," he said. "Harvey, I'm so happy. Did Grandma Jessica really do something for me then? Or was it just self-hypnosis?" She hugged him. "I don't know what it was, but I'm happy too." He held her close. And this time it went exactly the same way as the first time. Harvey did all the work himself. He wouldn't let his wife do any of it. She was only taking care of the baby and preparing for the second one. She was in the hospital again, although nothing bothered her, but the woman was worried about her son, how he was there without her. She would sooner give birth and go home, she said to her neighbors in the ward. "And how did you just decide? The first is still small, and you are all ready for the second?" Surprised young girls. "I have dreamed about it all my life, and now everything is coming true," Ariana said quietly. She already knew, when she started to feel a little tingle in her lower abdomen, that everything was starting. She still hadn't forgotten after the first time what to do, so there was no problem. And this time the boy showed up. "There you go, Barry. Soon you'll see your brother Mickey," Mommy was telling the little lump in the maternity ward, and Harvey was walking under the windows. He didn't want to be shown his son or anything. He was just happy for his family. There were 4 of them in the house now. Alyosha was already making confident steps, talking, and Barry was lying in his cradle. Grandmother often came to visit her grandchildren, but she could not hold them in her arms for long because she was ill. No sooner had they rejoiced at the birth of their second child than there was grief in the family. Ariana's father died. It was very painful, but she did not get upset and did not cry. She was afraid that the milk would disappear. After that, her mother moved into their house. There was enough room for everyone, and the extra hands came in handy. "I wish we had another girl," Harvey said to Ariana at night. "Thank God for that." She looked in the corner where the icon stood. "A girl would be nice," Harvey insisted. Ariana was happy. Mickey went to kindergarten. Barry was in his grandmother's care. Ariana wanted to go out to work. Harvey didn't mind. He always agreed with his wife. But Ariana had to work only 6 months because after that time she felt pregnant again. She wondered why it had never happened before. Apparently, it was necessary that you had to have children now, her mother told her. Yes, if only 10 years earlier, the woman sighed, but she didn't want to do anything. If God gives a child, it must come into the world. And again, she was in the same hospital. The doctor smiled when he saw her. "You come here often," he joked. "As long as I can, I will give birth," the patient calmly answered him. Nothing new happened. It was still the same room, a long corridor where she had walked when everything started. And for the 3rd time, Ariana had a son named Billy. The baby was born painful, but the doctor convinced the woman that she shouldn't worry too much. But Ariana was still very upset and let him be an invalid, but that it would not affect his life in any way. There was another family member in the house. The older boys were already helping their father with some things. They were doing something funny, stomping their feet, eating at the table. Father and mother were happy about it. One day, Mickey came home from kindergarten with a broken nose. What happened? Mother didn't understand. "It's nothing." The boy waved his hands, playing with the kids. The woman saw that she was raising very good sons. She realized that she had to give them education, show and tell them everything that she herself knows how to do. Harvey was directly involved in this as well. When the boys were in school, his father told and showed them how to drive a car, a tractor. They studied some details, all of which could only be admired, which is what Ariana did. Her mother was already very old. She had been lying down for a long time, and the woman took care of her. But she was gone at some point. Ariana cried. Her children and husband supported her in everything, but there was no time to grieve for a long time. It was necessary to work, bring up children, and everything else. While they were at school, the boys planned to stay in the village, not to go anywhere, to help their father and mother, as well as their collective farm. But the older the boys got, the more often their thoughts changed. And now that Mickey had finished school, he had to go to the army. His mother was very upset about it. "Mickey, Be careful, she asked him. It wasn't a peaceful time. There was a fierce war going on in some places. Oh, mother, don't worry. Everything will be all right, he promised her. The boy left. He wrote letters about how and where his days were going. Told about the new friends he met. The whole family would write him back. His mother, too, would post everything that happened during the days that there were no letters. She was very worried and looking forward to her son. Mickey was coming back from the army. The train was stopping in town. When the boy got off on the platform there, he decided to take a little walk. Some friends came with him and he stayed with them. So, Mickey, maybe we could go to a cafe and meet some girls, his friend suggested. I don't mind, Mickey said. He was not often in the city, only when he and his father came to the store. So now he was interested in everything. With his friend, they went to some cafe. There were really young girls there. They were brightly painted and dressed the same way. Leshka liked it all so much, he approached one of them when they sat for a while. Hi, he said to the girls. Go to your buddy. One of them turned around. And I wanted to meet you. He was naive. After not much persuasion, the girls finally agreed to meet. They moved to the table with the guys, and the evening continued with the four of them. You're not like the rest of the town, Nancy said as Mickey walked her home. What's that? Handsome? He guessed. Fuck you, she waved at him. Mickey was proud of himself. It was the first time he'd ever walked down the street with a girl. There were girls in the village, but they were all friends. And now here he was. He had met her, and now he was walking her home. Tomorrow I will come, he asked her at the entrance. Come, she opened the door and walked into the darkness. The guy was returning to his friend, thought that here he would linger for more than one day. Victor, why, I'll live with you? He asked his friend. If you want, you can, he shrugged. After that, Mickey started seeing Nancy. He wrote to his mother in the village that he was staying in town, but she beckoned him home. Nancy, will you come with me? He told her. What's there to do in your village? It was obvious she'd never go there, never live there. I'll introduce you to my parents. Tell them we're going to live in the city, he insisted. She agreed only after 2 weeks. Victor, where Mickey was staying, had hinted to him several times that it was time to move out. He promised him that as soon as they returned from the village, he would get a job and figure out what to do about the housing. Here now we will come. You will see what a huge house I have. Brothers, mother and father, he told her. Oh, what haven't I seen there? She looked away out the window. The girl liked the young man, but living in the countryside was not her story. She wanted to be in the city. When they arrived, Ariana immediately saw what the bride of her son was like. She was very brightly painted, wearing a short skirt, her blouse barely covering her belly. Mickey, where did you find her? His mother asked him. Mom, stop it, he soothed her. But the woman didn't want to stop. She had lived life. She knew that her son would not have a good family with this girl. While Mickey and Nancy were visiting his mother, they got a notice that Barry was being drafted into the army. How could it be? I haven't had time to meet one, and already the second one has to be sent, the woman lamented. But Barry was ready for it. He looked at his brother and wanted him to be the same. In general, boys from childhood repeated everything after each other. The send-off was over, and Barry left for the army. Mickey and Nancy went into town. There the boy went to apply for a job with the police. They took him in, even gave him a place to live. Now he and Nancy had a place to live. So, my dear, marry me, he brought her home a ring. How long did you think about it? She looked at him. What's the matter? Mickey didn't understand. How long have I been waiting for that ring? She hugged him. My mother suggested we get married in the country. There's more space there. All the relatives and acquaintances. But Nancy didn't want it. She wanted her wedding to be in a restaurant, to be upscale. Harvey and Ariana and Billy came along. Of course, it wasn't a big deal, but her son got married anyway. Mom, why are you so serious? Mickey asked her. You know I don't like your Nancy, she told him after the wedding. It's not your place to live with her. The son was offended. Okay, the woman wanted to hug Mickey, but he went to the bride. Ariana wiped her tears and went to her husband too. The young people began to live in the very apartment that Alexei was allotted from work. They were happy. Mickey worked. He was praised by his superiors. After a while, the husband came home with bad news. Then, don't you worry, he said to his wife. What's wrong? She looked at him. I'm being sent to a hot spot, he replied. How can that be? She came over and hugged him. Now everyone goes there in order, so don't worry, I will definitely come back. He was afraid, because already several of his comrades had gone there and did not return. Will you tell your mother? She asked. He knew she would be very upset, but there was no way out. He could not notify the most dear woman. That same weekend, they went to the village to tell his parents. Ariana, as soon as she heard it, immediately began to sob. She didn't understand why he had to do it, putting himself in danger, but the guy said that a lot of people had already left work, so it was his turn. Mickey left. Nancy was left home alone. Some time passed and the girl found out she was pregnant. What was there to do at home alone? She didn't understand. The girl put aside all her pride and the rest, got ready and went to Ariana's house in the village. Hello, she stood on the doorstep of her mother-in-law. Come in if you're here, she told her. You know, Mickey has left and we're going to have a little one soon. She touched her stomach. Oh, what a joy. Ariana clapped her hands. I'll be a grandmother soon. There was a lot to be happy about, but there was also a lot to be happy about. One son was in a hot spot, and the other was in the army. Nancy decided to stay with Ariana, who helped her with everything. I'm sorry for the way I acted before, the girl told her. It's all right. All young people are like that. The woman smiled. She had grown fond of her daughter-in-law, and now she didn't think of her as she used to. There was no news from Mickey at all. The women were very worried about that. They asked him at work, but they were kept in the dark. Nancy was very upset and cried a lot. Are you crying? Her mother came into her room. You know, her hormones were playing up, and now she was so worried. She didn't believe Mickey would come back. Nancy was called to the station. When the uniformed man saw her rounded belly, he couldn't get a word in edgewise. Talk already. She couldn't stand it. It looked like she was going to faint. Your husband died heroically, he told her. What? Nancy's eyes widened. She staggered. Please calm down. He handed her a glass of water. What did you just say to me? She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Excuse me, please, but I had to tell you that. The policeman didn't know how to justify himself. Nancy sat down on the chairs that stood there. She was in such shock that she couldn't even cry. Various thoughts ran through her mind, the main one being how to inform her mother. How would she react to this terrible news? But it had to be done. Mickey's colleague had written down the address where the body would be delivered, promised that everything would be done. After that, he saluted and went to his office. Nancy had to go back to the village, but she didn't know how to do it. She went to the station, bought a ticket, but not for the immediate future, but for the evening. Until then, she thought about how she would bring bad news to her husband's house. When she arrived at the village, she stood for a long time near the gate, not daring to go in. Suddenly, she saw Harvey walking down the street. Nancy, why are you standing there? He asked her. I don't know how to get in, she replied. Is something wrong? He tensed because he saw his sister-in-law's eyes crying. Yes, she answered quietly and didn't know how to say the next words. That's it. Let's go to the house. You can tell us everything there. He took her under his arm and led her into the gate. Nancy sat at the table, eating no food, touching nothing, just staring at one point. Why were you called in? Ariana was in the kitchen. Mickey's dead, she answered simply, still not taking her eyes off where she was staring. What? Ariana felt as if her heart had stopped. I also reacted there, the girl replied. The mother sat down on a chair. It was as if the house was short of air. Harvey handed her a glass of water. He too could not take in this information, but held on. When the zinc coffin was brought to the house, then everyone believed it had really happened. Mickey was buried by the whole village. A lot of nice words were said, but it couldn't help his mother. Nancy was taken away by ambulance from the event. I don't know how to live without him, the wife said when she returned to her mother-in-law's house. Nancy, this is our shared grief, and we will get through it together. They sat hugging each other in the kitchen. We should write Barry, Billy said one day. Don't you dare, his mother turned on him. Why, he'd have to know his brother was gone, the boy wondered. He's there now, and they might take him there too. And he was repeating everything after his brother. He'll go, They'll bring him back too, said the mother, not knowing that her words would be prophetic. Nancy gave birth to a baby girl. It was such a joy for Harvey, for he had longed so much for a daughter. He never left her side. I should probably go to town, she told her husband's parents. What are you going to do there? Stay here, it's so nice. Get a job somewhere. We'll look after our granddaughter, Ariana begged her. I can't stay here. Everything reminds me of him. Nancy began to cry. But she stayed anyway. Ariana got her a job at the same post office where she'd once worked. She and Harvey stayed home and only had her granddaughter to take care of. It was time for Barry to come home from the army. He also came with a girl. It is not known where they met. The family sat down at the table. When the boy learned about what had happened to his brother, he cried. "Why didn't you write me?" he shouted. "Son, believe me, it was necessary." His mother came up to him. They met his girlfriend. Her name was Ekaterina. She lived near the place where the son served. That's where they met. If you want to live separately, you can go to your grandmother's house, Ariana suggested. Barry and Catherine agreed to the proposal. They were now living in Ariana's mother's house. At first, everything was fine between them. But more and more often, Catherine began to go to the city. She was there for several days. Barry was nervous. Once the girl left once again, she was not there for a long time. Barry even went to look for her, but could not find her. The guy was very psychotic and decided that he had nothing more to do here. He went to the military enlistment office and asked to be taken to serve under a contract. "Barry, no," cried his mother, and knelt down in front of him when he told her this. "I'll go and avenge Mickey," he said. "Please don't." Nancy joined the woman. "Why are you so afraid for me? Nothing will happen to me." He was smug. Ariana knew there was no changing her son's mind. She was glad that Fidyushka was released from all this for health reasons. He did not go to the army. Barry also left home, and soon Nancy moved to the city. "So there we are, you and I alone in our old age," Ariana said to her husband. "What about me?" Billy looked at them. "And you, son, are with us." His mother hugged him. For some reason, she felt so sad that she couldn't put it into words. Lately, the woman had been crying a lot. She didn't understand how such a happy family could fall apart so quickly. "Don't be sad, Ariana. There will be a holiday on our street," Harvey told her. But her mother could not help it. Tears rolled from her eyes. Barry had stopped writing. She worried about her son. "You know him, he hasn't written to us since the army," Harvey reassured her. "Mom, Dad, stop grieving. Meet Sabrina, my fiancée." As if at a concert, Billy presented his girlfriend. "Jesus, Billy, where are you going?" Mom got up from her chair. "Why, everybody's allowed and I'm not?" He wondered. She'd known Sabrina since she was a kid. The girl was 2 years younger than her son. She was in contact with her parents, so the girl was warmly welcomed into the house. Every day Billy walked with her. His parents were happy for him. "Well, and you said sick. And his father was also happy that his son had found a bride. Billy did not wait long. After a short time of their communication, he proposed to the girl. The parents on both sides approved of the marriage. The wedding was played by the whole village. Although the mother was not so cheerful, but she tried not to show it. When everyone was about to go home, a girl who worked at the post office approached Ariana. She took her hand and looked her straight in the eye. "What?" Ariana tensed. "Barry," she said. "Barry what?" The mother didn't understand. "Missing," the girl muttered. "I don't understand." The mother sat down on a chair. "Missing, a telegram came," the postal worker explained. "It came today." She handed her a small piece of paper. Ariana looked at the girl for a long time and then covered her eyes with her hands and began to just howl. Tears were no longer enough to mourn this grief. "Ariana, what's the matter with you?" Harvey ran up to her at once, but she went on. Then the man spoke to the girl, and she told him everything. They went home in silence. Nobody knew what to say to each other. "We won't bury her," the mother said at once. "Bury who?" Harvey didn't understand. "No one, he's gone, and let him be gone. He's gone, and he doesn't write letters," she answered her husband. It seemed as if his wife had gone mad, but he said nothing. Harvey tried to keep his cool, but inner worries made themselves felt. One day the man became ill. He was taken to the hospital, and from there he arrived lying down. It was even more difficult for Ariana now. She was worried about everything that had happened and also had to walk behind her husband, who could not even get up. "Harvey, honey, why did things happen like this?" As if someone had jinxed her, she sat crying by his bedside. "I'm sorry," he told her. "Why should I forgive you?" She fell on his chest. "Because he couldn't die, but he condemned you to such agony. He kept thinking about it." "What are you talking about? Come on, you died too. That's all I need." She started to tell him off. It was all very sad. "How are Billy and Sabrina doing?" Harvey asked. "What's up with them?" "They're fine," the woman said. Billy and Sabrina had actually moved into the same house where Grandma used to live. They were planning their lives, wanting to become parents. "Billy, let's go fishing," his wife told him. "What are you doing fishing? It's already cold outside." He laughed back at her. "Why, we'll catch fresh fish. I'll make a pie," she promised him. But Billy didn't understand her zeal. "You're so imaginative." He picked her up in his arms and spun her around. Paula laughed. She loved her husband very much. Ariana was glad that at least her youngest son was doing well. She went to visit them every day, bringing home-cooked meals. "Mom, I want to go to work," her son once told her. "What are you doing? What kind of work with your health?" The woman was afraid for him. "You say the same thing. I do everything around the house." He pointed to the cabinets, which he had recently made himself. "I don't know, you can try," she shrugged and turned away. The next day, they went together to a man who ran a sawmill in their village. "Hello, Nanny," she approached him. "Hi," he smiled. "Listen, Billy wants to work. Will you take him on as a helper?" Ariana didn't like to ask, but she wanted to do something nice for her son. "Of course, I always need workers." He was glad that the boy wanted to work. The next day, the boy came on shift. It was confusing at first, but he got the hang of it. "Ariana, can't we at least put a cross on Barry?" her husband asked her. "Why?" She didn't understand. "To have a place to come and remember," Harvey cried. "I'll think about it. My mother's been more quiet lately. So come on, let's try to get up." Now that there was no one else in the house but her and her husband, she decided to help him. It was difficult, but they tried. And after 6 months, the man could sit up in bed. It made it very easy to take care of him. Billy and Sabrina came to visit his parents over the weekend. They planned to heat the bathhouse and then all sit around the table together. The parents were happy when their children came to visit them. They tried to do everything for them. Right now, Harvey was sitting in bed, talking to Sabrina. She worked in the library, read books, and told the man different interesting stories. "Bath is ready." A young man entered the house. "Son, you should at least eat," splashed his mother's hands. Lately, as he went to work, lost a lot of weight. "He will succeed," he smiled. Understandably, it was obvious that her coworkers didn't believe her. Nancy prepared herself for the meeting. Robert was handsome, successful, and young. She didn't know what they would talk about, but as the hour passed, the girl calmed down and went on taking her time. She was in the driveway when he pulled up to her. "Hi," he got out of the car and opened the door for her. "Already saying hello," she chuckled. "Get in," he helped her in. "Thank you." No one had ever looked after her like that before. They drove to a restaurant that was the only one in this town. Nancy suddenly began to worry. What if he asked her to do something later for this dinner? She didn't mind meeting Robert, but she knew absolutely nothing about him. "Have a seat." He pushed back a chair and waited for Nancy to sit down. "Thank you." She never tired of thanking him today. The young man ordered wine, something from the food, then put the menu aside, sat and looked at his companion. "What?" She was embarrassed. "Nothing, just looking at how beautiful you are." He took her hand in his. "It feels good." She lowered her eyes. "Let's drink to our future." He raised his glass. "Good." Nancy wondered at the man. They saw each other for the first time yesterday, and today they are already drinking to the future. In the restaurant, he asked her how she lived, why she was single, and other things. "I was married." She stopped on this word because a lump came to her throat. The girl was afraid to cry. "Good, I see that you do not want to talk about it. The main thing is that now you are alone." He did not pester with more questions. They sat almost until closing time. After that, Robert wanted to take her home. "You've been drinking wine, haven't you?" She was surprised he was going to drive. So what? Just a couple glasses, he smiled. Let's walk, and you can pick up the car later, she suggested. Okay, Robert agreed easily. They reached the very house where the girl lived. Robert kissed her hand again, and they said goodbye until tomorrow. Wow, what a decent man. With those words, she walked up the steps. In the morning, she arrived at work, and her boss was already waiting for her there. He had prepared a small bouquet of flowers for her. Why, she looked so no one would see. Just take it. He put it in her hands. It was flattering to Nancy. He had lifted her spirits this morning. Robert and Nancy started dating. 2 months after she got a job, the man suggested she move in with him and leave the firm. She hesitated for a long time, but she did what he said. You know, I need to talk to you. Nancy began one weekend. She and Robert had been living with him for 3 months. I'm listening to you very carefully. He came over and sat down next to her. I have a little daughter. She's at her grandparents' right now, but I'd like to take her home. She watched the man's reaction. What daughter? He furrowed his eyebrows. Mine, Veronica, from her first husband. The girl began to worry. No, you and I will have our own daughter and son. No, Veronica will not be here. Let her live at her grandmother's. You can visit her. He spoke in a stern tone, like at work. You can't do that. Nancy knew she was going to cry. Why not? Some children do better with their grandmothers than with their mothers, he said, because he had spent his entire childhood in the village with his grandmother. Well, Nancy did not argue with him, but thought she would talk to him about it later. The woman missed her child very much, and after a month she could not stand it, and again brought up the subject. But Robert didn't even want to hear about it. He said that it was necessary to give birth to another one. They lived together for a year, and then Nancy left, at which point she came to visit Ariana again. Wow, for the summer, her mother-in-law told her. Sorry, there were just circumstances. Nancy took a seat in front of Veronica. The latter stood looking at the woman. Hi, honey, have you forgot me? I'm your mom. She held out her hands. The girl looked at her grandmother and went to the woman. They embraced. After that, they entered the house. There, Nancy told the woman everything. Yes, things, exhaled that one. You what now? Stay with us, at least for a few days. No, I can't. I'm going home. Nancy looked at her watch. What about Veronica? Ariana was scared. Why? She's with me. Stood and gave Nancy a perplexed look. How in the world can that be? Who does that? The girl has lived with us for so long, and now you just take her away like that. Began to cry mother-in-law. Wait, but she's my daughter. She was standing there collecting the girl's things. And you've asked her, maybe she doesn't want to go anywhere? Practically shouted grandmother. At that moment, Harvey woke up. What's going on in there? He shouted from the room. Nancy's picking up Veronica, Ariana said loudly. How was she taking her? You could hear that the man was agitated too. The woman sat down on a chair. How much more loss she would have to endure in her life. Don't worry, we will definitely come to you again. The daughter-in-law wanted to approach the woman, but she made a gesture that told Nancy not to do so. Go, and you don't forget your grandparents. She hugged and kissed Veronica. At that moment, the girl cried loudly. She unhooked herself from her mother and ran to her grandfather. What's going on? You've been turning her against me here. Nancy started to get nervous. What are you talking about? They're in your town with your rich fiancé. Are you crazy? Ariana was surprised at how her daughter-in-law had changed lately. Don't insult me, she said. Leave us the girl. You'll have more children, the woman begged. No, she said that we will come to visit. She did not want to say more, took the bags, the girl, and they left the house. That night, Harvey had a seizure. Ariana called an ambulance and her husband was taken to a hospital in the city. Mom, what happened? Billy came in the next day after work. They took Daddy away. He was sick. She sounded like she wasn't feeling well herself. Are you all right? Her son came closer to her. She wiped her face with her hand. We should go see him. He sat down next to her. Yes, I was thinking the same thing. She sat and looked at the beautiful tablecloth that was laid on the table. Then in 2 days on the weekend, we'll all go together. Billy was sure of what he was saying. At home, he told Sabrina everything. She just didn't understand how a woman could be so cruel. She knew the grandparents were fond of their granddaughter, but no, she took her away anyway. Billy, let's move to your mother's house. It would be easier for her. She thought about it more than once. If you don't mind, we'll do that. He was glad that his wife was so kind. A day later, they were sitting together in the kitchen, as they had done when they were children. What if he dies? Ariana asked in a trembling voice. What are you talking about? Her son immediately came and sat at her side. Why, there have already been 2 attacks. The woman could not help crying. Oh, let's not talk. Tomorrow we will go to the hospital, and there everything will be clear, concluded the guy. Okay, the mother agreed with him. In the morning, before the trip, Ariana decided to go to the cemetery to her son. She sat there on a bench, cried, and told what had happened. After that, she looked at Mickey's picture for a long time and thought that she should bring Dimka's picture here too. When she had to leave for the station, Ariana said goodbye to her son, kissed the picture, and left. Where have you been so long? Billy was afraid I'd be late. Went to the cemetery. She saw that the bus was not yet there. Why then was her son so nervous? But she knew that Billy did that a lot. They arrived, talked to the doctor. He walked them to the room. Harvey was lying on the bed. Everything they'd been trying to accomplish for so long was gone at once. The man lay there again and did not move. Harvey, his wife, came up to him and kissed him. I'm sorry, he barked again, but now his speech was very slurred. Enough already, get well soon. We'll take you home, she whispered to him. I'll try. He even tried to smile. They returned home. No one talked about anything. They all realized that now there was no time for that. Do you think Barry's really dead? The mother started the conversation first. Why would you think otherwise? Billy didn't like these conversations. Then Mom was like a crazy person. I don't know. Doesn't my heart feel like it's gone? She put her hand on her chest. I don't have anything to answer you, Billy shrugged. Fine. I wanted to take Dimka's picture to the cemetery today to talk to them there, Ariana admitted. It was about time Billy, like Harvey, also wanted to put a cross on his brother. Okay, we'll deal with that later. How are you doing? It was as if Ariana had reorganized herself. She got up and started to put the kettle on and put something on the table, and rightly so, since they hadn't eaten since this morning. We're doing fine, Sabrina said. I don't see anyone small and barefoot running around the house, she hinted to them, for the umpteenth time, that they were slow with the children. Mama, we'll let you know as soon as we get something, Billy looked at her. Yeah, I know you, she was trying to be perky. Then they all sat down at the table, drank tea, and ate delicious potatoes and meat. In the morning, Billy and Sabrina would go to work, and Mom would do the chores. What are we going to pick up, Dad? The woman asked her son and daughter-in-law a few weeks later. He was discharged. Sabrina was happy. Yes, they said they could take him home, Ariana cried. Mom, don't get so upset, Billy hugged her. I won't. I feel sorry for Harvey. He can't cry in front of her. He thinks he's a burden. She wiped her tears, which were almost gone. They were back at the station, waiting for the bus. They had to hire a car to get back, but it was no big deal. Harvey, his wife, entered the room. He turned his head and looked with such sad eyes that the sobs came to his throat again. Leave me here. What do you need me for? Cried Harvey presently. Don't you remember what we promised before the altar? For better and for worse, for better and for worse, for the rest of our days. She went over and put her arms around her husband. You're a saint. He pressed his cheek against her. I just love you. She tried to lift him up to transfer him to the wheelchair, but couldn't. She had to call Billy. The young man quickly made it all by himself. They called a car and drove to their village. Some time passed. It was winter outside. Sabrina returned from work. Mom, she turned to Ariana. Yes, she turned around. God finally heard you. She stood with a sweet smile and put her hands on her stomach. No way. She walked over to her sister-in-law and hugged her. Just don't tell Billy. I want to tell him myself, the girl asked. Okay, I'll go tell Grandpa. She headed for the room where Harvey lay. Now that they had a stroller, she could walk with him. Honey, she sat down on the bed and put her hand on his chest. You're going to be a grandfather again soon. This was happy news. Harvey was getting worse every day. Ariana left him. She was cooking dinner and humming to herself. Billy came back from work. She looked at him and smiled. Go see your wife, his mother told him. What's wrong? He's a little wary. Go and find out for yourself. She couldn't wait to see how he would react when he learned the truth. "I love you." She heard it from behind the closed door. "Congratulations, son." Mom hugged him and kissed him. With Mickey and Barry gone, all the motherly love went to the youngest son. It was decided to bake pies, make the family's favorite dish, all gather around the table and celebrate the occasion. "I'll help." The girl came out of the room. "Thank you," thanked her mother. "You're welcome." The daughter-in-law was not difficult to do household chores. But when I was pregnant, I couldn't even go to the table. It was so Okay. Billy laughed and started cutting the pie. And at that moment, his mother took the cauldron out of the oven. After a good sit-down, everyone dispersed. Ariana was talking to Harvey about something, and Billy and Sabrina went to their room. "Son, get up. It's time to go to work." Billy's mom knocked on Billy's room. "I am all ready." She heard his voice and went to prepare breakfast. Things were getting better. The daughter-in-law was going to work. She had nothing left before her maternity leave. Billy was working. His boss was praising him. His mother couldn't help but be pleased. Except Harvey was fading from day to day. "I'm not well. Everything hurts," her husband often said. Then Ariana would give him a shot. "I understand, darling." Her wife stroked his head. "Hurry up." The man exhaled. "Don't." Ariana snuggled up to him. "Let him be like this, but he's home." He's lying there talking to her. She forbade herself to even think of anything bad. Months passed. Sabrina was already on maternity leave. Soon the family would have a baby. Ariana had prepared a corner in the children's room for the baby to be brought in, and everything was already in place. The daughter-in-law started packing for the hospital. "Are you sure you have everything packed?" worried mother-in-law. "Yes," she pointed to the bag. To make sure, Ariana started to check everything. He and Billy sent the girl from the station together. The son wanted to go with his wife, but the mother talked him out of it, said she'd go when it happened. A week and a half passed. A woman came from the post office and said that Paula had given birth. She contacted her parents and they asked her to tell Ariana. "Billy," Mom ran into the room. "Happy news, you're a daddy." He started running and jumping. Then he packed up and went to see his wife. They were gone for a few days and then they came back. Ariana had already notified all the neighbors that they would soon have a party. Ariana couldn't look at the baby. He looked just like her eldest son. "Mom, did you see? He looks just like Mickey," Billy immediately told her. Don't tell me," she stopped him. "Okay, I understand how hard this is for you," her son agreed with her. The woman overcame herself. She helped her daughter-in-law with everything, and often the girl's parents came too. Ariana, when she took Carlo in her arms, she immediately went back many years. There she gave birth to her first boy, sat and told him stories. "Mom," she shuddered. Sabrina came up to her. "Oh yes," she handed the boy to her. After that, the girl went to feed him and put him to bed. "How's the milk?" My mother-in-law was worried. "So far so good." Paul liked that the woman was worried about her. Billy continued to work. Now he was trying to bring in more money. He took on extra work. He had to meet the cars that brought in logs and boards. "Aren't you overstretching yourself?" His mother was worried about him. "No, you're not. It's a little more difficult, but I handle everything." And he wasn't fooling. That afternoon, he left for work in the morning. Carlo was crying hard. Sabrina couldn't tear herself away from him to see her husband off. "Billy," happily, shouted his wife from the room. "I love you," her husband answered her. "Son, wait." Ariana wanted to go to him and hug him. "What are you all doing today?" "As if I'm leaving forever," laughed the young man. "Come on," the mother frowned. "Okay, Dad, bye." He never addressed his father. He answered nothing, only breathed heavily. Billy came to the sawmill. He took the task that needed to be done today. 2 cars were due. It was 2 hours away, so the guy went to do the main job. He had to cut some long lumber. "You working?" The owner stopped by. "Yeah," he looked up at him. "Well, don't forget about the cars," the man reminded him. Billy hadn't forgotten about it. He finished and went to the gate. He saw that the cars were on their way. All that remained was to meet them, show them where to stand, and then pile up the boards. Billy had everything calibrated. He waved to the driver, who followed his directions. "Hi." He opened the doors and shouted to the guy. "Drive through." Billy hurried him along. The car was parked where it was supposed to be. Billy walked to the side, started to open it. There was no telling who was to blame for the situation, but for some reason the boards were loose. Whoever had assembled them hadn't thought of that. They immediately started falling out of the back of the truck. Billy didn't have time to get away. He was crushed, and the boards kept falling. Jesus, boy. The driver was awake, and he ran over to where it had just happened. What's going on? The man in the second car came over. Call Manny. The first one told him about the boss. Everyone started running, fussing. Finally, something stopped falling out of the car. Nanny was already here by then. They scattered the fallen boards. Billy was unconscious. Call an ambulance, the man ordered, and went into the office. He sat at his desk, clutching his head. How could this have happened? What would he say to Ariana now? How would he look into her eyes? The ambulance took a long time to arrive, but it was here. Billy was loaded on a stretcher. He was alive. In the car, they began to administer first aid. But after a few kilometers from the village, the guy stopped breathing. The injuries were incompatible with life. Bring Miss Shutka here, Ariana told her sister-in-law. Now, will you go for a walk? The girl asked. Yes, now I will dress Harvey and we can go out for a while, was the usual conversation. Ariana, Sabrina, a neighbor ran into the house. What are you doing? Someone died. The woman looked at him. Yes, Feka, he couldn't catch his breath. What are you talking about? He was at work. The mother was still tending to the baby. And died there? The boards piled up, clarified the guest. That can't be. Ariana almost dropped the baby from her arms. The man was still talking when Sabrina came into the kitchen. Is it true? She looked at him with tears in her big eyes. Son. She heard the woman moaning from Harvey's bedroom, followed by some wheezing. She couldn't move. Mommy, Uncle Harvey's sick, Paula shouted. But for Ariana, nothing else existed. She heard and saw everything, but she felt nothing. As Sabrina came toward her and began to scream, her mother-in-law flinched. Your husband is dying, the girl shouted at the whole house. So what? I want to. Why should we live now if there is no one around? No one, she repeated. Sabrina put Carlo in the crib and herself ran to her father-in-law. But what could she do? Harvey turned his head toward the kitchen where his wife sat. He could no longer speak, only stare. At the last moment, Ariana came to her senses. She stood up and walked over to her husband. I'm sorry, the man exhaled. He put his hand on his wife's shoulder as she leaned over him. He closed his eyes and he was gone. No, Harvey. The woman screamed as if she was being cut. Mom, Sabrina was also having a hard time, but someone had to remain adequate in this situation. That evening, Ariana sat on a chair in the center of the kitchen, a glass of sedative in her hands. Mom, the girl approached her quietly. But there was not a sound from the woman. She just froze, seemed not even to breathe. We have a lot to do tomorrow, Sabrina continued. And how can you be so calm? With just one lip spoke the mother who had lost everyone. I have a child. If I put my hands down, who will be by his side? I advise you to pull yourself together too, she said in a calm tone. That night was the worst night of the woman's life. She was lying on the bed and looking at the ceiling. Nanny came, he said something, offered compensation. What's the point of all this now, if you can't bring people back? In the morning, the real preparations began. Both father and son were to be brought in the next day. Ariana did everything on automatic. She saw how hard it was for her daughter-in-law. She had to pull herself together. And now her favorites were standing in the house. They looked as if they were alive, just asleep. Mishaka was crying. Ariana and Sabrina were crying too. Let's go, there are people coming, the woman called out to Sabrina. The girl's mother was here. She was helping with the baby. No one from the village could believe that such a thing could happen. Almost the entire population was in the cemetery. Saying goodbye, the mother threw a handful of earth, and then tears sprang from her eyes. They hadn't been for so many years, and now she couldn't stop. Don't cry, Sabrina hugged her. You still have grandchildren. But there was no way those words could soothe Ariana's heart. She looked at all the people gathered. She realized that everyone was grieving, but tomorrow they would simply forget that these two people had once lived. She returned home. It was cold and empty, no one here. Sabrina said she would go to her mother's for a while and then come back. Her mother-in-law realized that the wench was about to move out on her. Why would she want to live with a strange woman when she had her own mother a couple houses away? The woman did not want to eat or drink. She just lay on the bed where her husband had lain for several years until recently. "Mom," she heard Sabrina come in. "I'm here," she said, but never got up. "We're here." Put the grandson to his grandmother. "Okay, you're going to go to your parents now." That worried her most of all. Why we have to live together? Sabrina did not look into the woman's eyes. I knew it. The tears flowed down her cheeks again. "There is no need to be upset. We live in the neighborhood. I will come often, and you can come to us even every hour," the girl reassured her. Ariana patted the girl's hand. She realized that she was still young and could build another life. Today, the girl stayed here. She was afraid to leave her mother-in-law alone, and in a few days, as she said, she moved to her parents. Ariana did not have any classes left. For herself, she did not want to do anything. She spent all her time in the cemetery. There was one grave there. Her mother still brought a picture of her middle son. "Well, my dears, now you're all together. Why am I left here all alone?" She spoke to the people she was closest to. Ariana, a local worker, came up to her. "Wow, you scared her." She looked around. "I see you here every day. I thought I'd come over." He was looking at pictures of the people who were buried here. "What else am I supposed to do?" She was crying. "Go to church, pray for their souls, advise the one, you'll see, it will be easier." The woman thought that was a good idea, and why hadn't she thought of it before? She got up and walked towards the temple. That she really felt better. From that day on, she started coming here every day to pray. "Is it bad?" Her sister came up to her one day. "Yes, my heart is breaking from the pain in my chest," Ariana confessed to her. "I understand." She closed her eyes. "I pray, I put candles on. I get relief." It was true. Slowly, the woman came back to life. She realized that she had a grandson who also needed a grandmother. Now she had another address where she visited very often. Mishka was very happy to have a grandmother. If Sabrina's mother worked, Ariana could walk in for days on end. "Is everything all right?" Every time her daughter-in-law asked her. Yes, and even if it wasn't true, no one had to know about it. A year had passed since her husband's death. Ariana went to the cemetery. She wanted to stop at the store as usual, buy a wake, and then go to her family. On the way, she met Sabrina. "Aren't you going to the cemetery?" she asked her sister-in-law. "We have already been there since morning." Ariana saw that the girl was in a hurry. "Are you in a hurry?" she decided to ask her. "Yes, I have to get to work while someone is there. If you could take a walk with Mishka, I would be very grateful." The girl looked at her. "Of course. What are you saying? You should have brought him right away," smiled Ariana. To walk with her grandson, she did not need to beg. Paula left. She was gone for a long time. Ariana began to look at her watch. She thought it would be late to get to the cemetery. "I'm sorry I'm late." My daughter-in-law came up behind her. "It's okay. I don't care when I get there." The woman went where she was going. She entered the fence, and almost immediately the man who had told her about the church came up to her. "Could I sit here with you for a while?" he asked. Yes, she didn't mind having someone to keep her company. Ariana herself started to clean up the graves. She did everything and only then sat down. The whole time the man was silent. "Thought you might want to talk." She was surprised by that. "At first I thought that too, and then I realized you don't have time to talk." He was looking at the picture of the woman's husband again. "Okay, could you go to your room? I need to talk to my husband and children," the woman asked. "Okay, have a good day." He walked between the graves. It was getting dusk outside, but Ariana didn't think of going home. "My loved ones, how come I outlived everyone?" She sat on the bench and stroked her husband's portrait because he was the outermost. Out of the corner of her eye, Ariana saw someone walking in the distance. At first she was scared, but then she thought it was the man who had recently left her. "No, don't think, I'm not scared," she grinned. What was there to be afraid of? Ariana heard the cemetery gates creak. They should have been oiled long ago, but no one had gotten around to it. The woman turned that way. She saw her familiar. "Then who's there?" She looked over to where she saw another person. A chill ran down her spine and she started to get ready to go home. Enough of this. There would be time tomorrow. She would come again. Ariana got up from the bench, gathered her things, checked to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything, bent down, kissed all the pictures. When she straightened up, she almost lost her mind. There was a man standing in front of her. She fell senseless right there on the graves of the most dear people. The woman woke up, but was in no hurry to open her eyes. First, she was going over in her head what had happened today. She was getting ready, and then he appeared. Ariana opened her eyes. She was in her house. She heard someone in the kitchen. She remembered that man, would recognize him out of a million others, even though he was mutilated. But she had to be sure. "Who's there?" she shouted. Finally, awake, a man came into the room, his face scarred and burned. "Barry." She rushed over to him. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. "Mom," he was hugging the woman. "Where have you been? How are you? What happened to you?" She kissed his face and bombarded him with questions. "Wait, let's eat something. I'm so hungry." He sat down at the table. Now, it was as if the mother was alive. She was ready to roll mountains. Something was ready, but Ariana didn't stop. When everything was on the table, she sat down next to her son. "I understand that everything is interesting, I'll tell you." It seemed to his mother that he never left. "When the telegram came that you were missing, I immediately said that nothing and no one we will not bury," said the woman. "Consider me practically dead. Saw my picture there." He kept eating. "I'll clean everything up. It's just that you've been gone so long that I stopped believing." Ariana admired her son. She thought that the prayers she was now reciting had helped her. They sat up with Barry until nightfall, and he walked around the house, remembering what had happened. Then he went out into the yard. "Come on, I'll introduce you to my nephew." His mother didn't know what else to offer him. "Okay." He started to get dressed. "Paulia, are you home?" The woman knocked on the window. Yes, she looked out. She noticed a man with a disfigured face, surprised. "Shall we come in, or are you coming in?" Before coming in, the mother clarified. "I'll be right out." The girl hurried. She gathered the child, and in a few minutes she was already on the street. "Hello," Barry greeted her. "Hello." She looked at his scars. Scared, he touched his hand. "No." Sabrina turned to Ariana with a question in her eyes. "Didn't recognize it?" The one asked. She was glowing with happiness. "No." The surprise on the girl's face didn't go away. "Barry is mine," the woman informed her. "What?" She was so happy that she immediately began to hug him. "Let's go," Ariana urged them on. Barry took the stroller and drove it down the street. In the house they talked for a long time, but everyone wondered only one thing, where he had disappeared for so long. "I hate to remember, but you'll have to tell me everything. It was scary." He lowered his head. "If you're not ready for it now, then you don't have to tell. When you realize that you have to do it, you'll talk it out." His mother came to him. "Okay, let's sleep together tonight, and then we'll see." He looked at Sabrina. They stayed with him a little longer. At first the boy was afraid of the scary uncle, but then he was eager to take him in his arms. In the morning, Barry went out into the yard, where everything was in disrepair. He flooded the bathhouse and began to remodel the place. Mother saw it all. She sat and smiled. That night, Ariana couldn't sleep. She didn't believe it could be. So there is a God, because he heard her mother's suffering. Her son had returned. "Mother, make some tea. Make it strong," Barry said. She went straight to the stove. "It'll be ready in a minute," she shouted out the window. Sabrina and her son were visiting again today. They were sitting at the table. "What happened to Billy?" the man asked. He saw that after his question, the girl was ready to burst into tears. He was crushed by boards at the sawmill. Ariana went to her daughter-in-law and hugged her. "I'm sorry." Barry looked into her eyes. She wiped away the tears that had not yet rolled down her lashes. "Okay, I'll tell you everything," he exhaled. Ariana sat down next to him. She felt sorry for her son. "You saw me off then I left. First, there was a training camp, but not for long. And then we were brought there," he said, and he seemed to be immersed in his memories. "Forward," the senior officer shouted to them. "Come on, did you see what's going on?" Barry muttered under his breath. He saw the guys running ahead of him, just falling as the bullets hit them. Barry was lying in a ditch. He saw the cover. Thought he could take cover for a while. What was the point of getting shot at? He felt someone grab him by the scruff of the neck. "Don't lie here," the commander yelled in his face. Yeah, the fear was stronger than all the yelling and everything else. He made his way, but with great caution. In boot camp, when the other guys were getting to know each other, Barry sat alone. He didn't want to make friends here so he wouldn't lose anyone later. In the evening in the tent, they discussed what losses they had suffered and what to do next. Barry was silent. He had regretted coming here more than once, but for now there was no turning back. In the evening, he was put out as a sentry. He wanted to sleep badly, but he endured it. Barry saw some lights in the distance, but he didn't think much of it. "Everything all right?" The commander came to him in the morning. It was cold. His uniform was wet from dew. He was shaking. Everything was fine. Barry didn't know if he'd slept the night before or not. This was the day his boys were going to attack. He saw a pop coming toward their tent. It was strange to see. The bishop went inside. Prayer began. "You stay," the older Barry said, and there were a few others with him. The soldiers left, and there were only a few people left in the tent and the bishop. Suddenly, there was a whistle and darkness. After that moment, Barry didn't know what happened. He woke up somewhere. He didn't understand anything. His whole body ached. The guy was just lying there with his eyes open. "Wake up," he heard a man's voice with an accent. "Who are you?" the guy asked. "Nobody," laughed the man. Barry tried to sit up, but he couldn't. "What's wrong with me?" He felt his face. It was covered in rags. "You're dead," said the same voice. "How?" "My head was a mess. You were in the tent when the explosion happened. I don't know how you did it, but everyone was blown apart and you were thrown far away." He walked over to where the guy was lying. "That's rough." Barry fidgeted on the bed. "Don't move, you'll hurt yourself," he warned him. The young man continued to lie there. He tried to remember who he was, how he'd gotten here in the first place, but something was going on in his head. It seemed that here it was. The thought came, but immediately ran away. "Dad, is he awake?" He heard the girl's voice. "Yes, come and see," he answered her. A pretty young woman approached Barry. She leaned over him and started checking his bandages. "I don't know," he wanted to shrug but couldn't. "You have multiple fractures, burns on your face, and shrapnel wounds," she mumbled. "How did I survive?" It was a mystery. "Thank her," a man approached. "What?" Barry was surprised. "The daughter always pities everyone she can help. She does it right away. And you even dragged you to the house." It was heard that the father was not pleased. "What's your name?" She was sitting next to him. "Me." He was silent and rolled his eyes. "Don't you remember?" She shook her head. "I don't know." The boy was confused. After such injuries, it was to be expected. She touched his forehead, lifted his head, looked at the wound on the back of his head. "I remember." He was still trying to catch his thoughts. Perhaps she didn't know it herself. After that, the girl nursed Barry every day. "Daddy, he should be given a name," the girl said. "What do you like?" He came up to her. "I don't know, maybe Tony." She looked to see if he'd say yes or no. "Okay." He pressed his lips together and went somewhere else. "Your name's Tony." She went back to Barry. "What? How did you know that?" He flinched. "I made it up," she laughed. "What about you?" After he moved a little, a pain so sharp it blew tears out of his eyes. "Tony," she blushed, but the guy didn't see it. Every day she sat next to him, telling him something, showing him pictures. Barry just lay there. He never remembered anything. A month later, he could sit up on his own, but Tony still helped him with everything. "Will you get up?" After 2 months, she suggested it. From the street, she brought a rake on which the guy stepped. On the other side stood she. Barry gathered all the strength he had left in him, tensed up, and stood up. His legs were in a lot of pain. "I can't." He sat back down on the bed. "Okay, bear with it some more," she agreed. And again, all the days they are together, she tells and he listens. The girl was very pretty. The guy didn't understand what she was doing here, decided to ask about it. "My mom was very sick, so my brother decided to become a doctor and help her. Got in, went to school, helped us the whole time. After graduation, he came back to do everything for the woman he loved the most. At that moment, I also went to medical school, but I had time to finish only 2 courses. When my father came to pick me up, and told me that my mother was dying. I came back to take care of her. We could not save her, she died. After that, my brother left. From that moment, we did not see him. Dad was having a very hard time. That's why I stayed with him. I thought if I left like my brother, Dad would get sick too. Tony was crying. It's okay. Barry didn't know what to do to support her. It's okay. These moments of weakness come often, but I'm hanging in there. She smiled and wiped away her tears. I'm ready, Barry said suddenly. For what? The girl wondered. To stand up, he spoke confidently. You're in pain, aren't you? She realized he might not get up for a while. So what? I'll manage. He was so energized by the girl's strength that he was ready for anything. Hold on. She put her shoulder to the side. It hurt a lot, but he stood up. Tony looked up at him. She could see him clenching his teeth and breathing hard, but standing. You'll be running soon, she promised him. Why did you decide to help me? He wondered. After the explosion, the militants ran to finish off the survivors. I spotted you near the bushes, dragged you there. They didn't notice, and then I dragged you home. She didn't look at him. How did you do it? I'm thin but not light. It was true. On a piece of tarp, it was hard, but she did it. My relatives are probably looking for me, Barry suggested. You don't remember anything at all? She asked this every time. You know, it's like a thought comes to mind and it's not there. He couldn't explain it. They'd talk like that for hours. That's what they did. When 6 months had passed, Barry was already getting up normally, walking with a limp, but it was already progress. He helped the girl in her business, and he didn't neglect his father either. What a good boy you are, Tony praised him. Look, if it wasn't for you, he would shut up and just stare into her beautiful eyes. Once they were alone at home, which happened a lot, his father was away all the time. I've been living here for a year. Why don't you try looking for my relatives? What to look for? She was already thinking about it. He touched her cheek, where there was a terrible scar. Don't, she took his hand and pulled it away from her face. He held it in his hand, kissed her fingers. Thanked them for making it right. Barry was so gentle. That was it. She was like a tomato. Took her hand away. I like you, the guy admitted, because there's no one else here. There's nothing to compare you to, she laughed. Do you think your father will agree to let you marry me? He asked the girl a question. I don't know. I have to ask. She turned and looked at the front door. I'll do it today, the boy promised. When the man returned, Barry challenged him to a conversation. Daughter, do you want it too? He inquired of her. Yes, she was ashamed to admit it to her father. I don't know, he's Orthodox, her father doubted. Then the boy and the girl decided to live together like that. The father himself blessed them. You're so good, Barry said to his as he called his wife. And you, Allah once sent you to me, she purred in his ear. They still loved to talk, an activity that took up most of their time. Now Barry and Tony were out walking. They lived in a picturesque place, lots of greenery and trees. I'm so scared of losing you, the girl kept saying. Don't be afraid, as long as you're around, it won't happen, she assured him. Barry believed her. Now he wanted only one thing, at least to remember his name, but nothing happened. They continued to live together. It had been several years. Barry was used to everyone calling him Tony. He responded to that name. Everyone around him thought he and Tony were husband and wife. Spiritually, they were. One day, they went to a place where the terrain was mountainous. There was a creek. The girl had told Barry many times about this place. He wanted to see it, and today they went out there. Come here, she was standing on a high ledge. Wait, not so fast. After his injuries, it was hard for him to lift his legs high. He tried. At that moment, there was a sharp sound. The girl shrieked and started to fall. No, screamed the guy. He tried to catch his beloved, but he couldn't. She fell on the rocks. Barry quickly descended, picked her up in his arms and rushed towards the house. What happened? His father saw him. Tony, she was shot, cried Barry. At home, it became clear that the girl was no longer alive. Ah, screamed Barry. At one point, he got a bad headache and grabbed his head with his hands. And then, he suddenly realized clearly that his name was Barry. What? The man looked at him. He was crying too. I remembered everything. He jumped to his feet. Afterward, we buried her, and I began to think how to get home, but I couldn't do anything. Then my beloved's father volunteered to help me. I do not know with whom he agreed, but in a few days I was escorted to the territory of the United States. After that, I got here on my own. I went to the cemetery to tell my brother that I was alive. I came back, and there I saw you, and I approached you." The boy finished telling his story. He looked up. Sabrina was sitting there crying. There were tears in her mother's eyes too. "Honey, how much you've been through, but you're home. And that's the most important thing." She didn't go near him. He already realized that she was hugging him mentally. "What a beautiful story," Sabrina said. It was late. Carlo was asleep in her arms. "Would you like to stay?" Ariana asked her. "Yes," she nodded. That night, no one slept except the baby. The mother was still digesting the story she had heard from her son today. Sabrina thought that the boys had to worry, and Barry himself, when he remembered it all, could not calm down. Why is life so unfair? They had just found each other, and everything was cut short in an instant. "Mom, we should probably go." The girl woke up early in the morning. "Wait, I'll make breakfast now." She got out of bed. They went out in the kitchen. Barry was already sitting at the table. "How did you sleep?" he asked. He looked tired. It was obvious that he hadn't slept. He didn't. His mother didn't elaborate. They ate breakfast together, and then Paula got ready to go home. "I'll walk her home." Barry looked after her. Good, she wondered why. They walked out of the gate together, Ariana watching them from the window. She saw her son looking at the girl. "You remind me of her," he admitted. "Who?" The field didn't understand at first. "Tony," he said the name with great affection. "In what way?" She wanted to know. "I don't know, the way you looked, the hair." He touched her long braids. "You are good." The girl smiled at the corners of her lips. They reached her house, stopped. "Would you come today?" It was important to him that she answered. Yes, she looked at her son. "And let's take a walk alone. Let the grandmothers take care of him." He was afraid to say it, but took a chance. "Okay," she agreed quickly. Barry wanted to jump for joy. He went back to his mother's house and waited until evening. Sabrina was waiting for him outside. "Where are you going?" His mother was surprised when he started to pack. "I'm going for a walk." He opened the doors and stepped out. What took so long? The girl was embarrassed to be standing here alone. "I'm sorry," he walked over to her. The mother was watching them from the window. She thought nothing and didn't want to say anything. "If they succeed, the girl will return to our family." Ariana approached the icons. "Would you date someone like me?" He walked and looked in front of him. "Why not?" She glanced at him. "Well, I'm not exactly normal." He put a finger to his temple. "It's okay." She took his hand and pulled it away. "Do you know how much you look like her?" He took her hand in his and started kissing it. Barry stopped. "It's still early." She pulled her hand away. "Okay, sorry." They walked down to the river, sat down on the bank. "Will you move back in with us?" he asked her. "I don't even know if it would be comfortable." She watched the fine ripples appear on the water. "Would you like to live at Grandma's house?" He noticed that the wind was picking up too. "We used to live there with Billy," she said sadly. "Billy's gone, but you're alive. You have a baby to raise. I'll help you," he promised. "Okay, I think we're rushing things." She stood up, realizing it's gonna start raining. "Run, it's going to start raining." He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the house. "Wait, I'm going to fall." She couldn't break free. Barry stopped. Already slower, they managed to run away before the rain. He left her outside the house. He went to his own place. "Do you want to go out with Sabrina?" His mother asked him from the doorstep. "Do you mind?" He froze. "No, we need to go to the cemetery to talk to Billy, so he won't be offended," the woman said in all seriousness. "Are you serious?" Barry tried to smile, but the scars did not allow it to do it fully. "Of course, I generally go there for every trifle and consult." She poured boiling water into mugs. The next day, Ariana, Barry, and Sabrina came to the cemetery. They sat on a bench, their mother talking to the monuments. Suddenly, a man Ariana already knew appeared. "Hello." He took a seat with them. The family responded to the greeting. Next, they talked to Barry. The man marveled at the miraculous return. "For years, I've been looking at your picture here, and now here you are, sitting next to me, alive." The man gestured vigorously. "And come and visit us tonight." The young man invited him. "If you invite, I will definitely be." He looked at Ariana. "Why did you invite him?" The mother spoke sternly on the way back. Did you see the way he looks at you? It was clear to the sun. Really, she started laughing loudly. Why? More years. Why not feel happy in your old age? Barry said all this and believed his mother deserved it. In the evening, Michael came to them. He brought a bunch of flowers, handed them to Ariana. Do you know how many years I've watched you suffer there on those graves? He asked her in a whisper. No, she was surprised, because she herself had only recently met him. Well, let's go to the table. The man could see that the young ones were already interested in what the adults were talking about. There were casual conversations at the table. No one brought up the war or the dead. They sat and lived the moment that was happening now. Ariana, I like you. Let's communicate. Michael looked at her and waited for an answer. I don't even know. She shifted her gaze to the children. Agree, her son prompted her. Good, she, as a girl began to blush. After these sit-downs, Barry and Sabrina started dating, as did Michael and Ariana. Old men, and yet the woman knew that the village was starting to talk about them. Paid no attention to anyone. He didn't care about the gossip. A year and a half had passed since Barry's return. As he wanted, together with Sabrina, they moved into the house where his grandmother had once lived. It was a decision made to keep his mother and her boyfriend from living together. Daddy, are we going out today? Carlo ran up to him. Of course, dear. He lifted the boy and put him on his shoulders. Will you marry me? He whispered to his beloved. Am I definitely Sabrina to you, or do you live with me and represent her? It was a very important question. What are you saying? Of course you are you, my favorite. He liked to take her in his arms and twirl. She was so fragile. He wanted to protect her from everyone. Okay, I agreed. She kissed his cheek where the scar was. Barry was always embarrassed afterward. He thought she was disgusted by it, but she purposely showed him it was okay. You know, I don't like that. He was embarrassed. It's okay, love. She raised her hands and ruffled Carlo's hair. Mommy, he shouted. Beloved, you're ours. Mother was happy. Daddy, shouted the boy. Aha, I am your real daddy. They agreed that when Michael grows up, they will be sure to tell him about his real father. From now, let him grow up and know that his uncle will be his father temporarily. Are you ready, my love? He wanted to look into the room, but she didn't let him. Wait, I'll tell you when I'm ready. She put on a white dress. They stood, so beautiful. Finally, Sabrina smiled an open smile. She had a ring sparkling on her finger and a trustworthy man by her side. Barry looked out into the hall. His mother and Michael looked as if they had gotten younger when they started living together. Ariana went to church and the cemetery that way. She would tell her sons and Harvey how they lived, what was going on in the house. You don't mind, do you? She asked Michael, who was usually waiting for her at the gate. No, if you feel like doing it, I'll never mind. He loved the woman. It happened at an hour when the roosters had not yet crowed over the village of Pompeii. The sun was still just hinting at its readiness to rise above the horizon, illuminating its azure with faded gold, and the dew thickly covered both the flood meadow by the river and the burdocks in the vegetable garden. Come on, let's go. John held his young wife's hand tightly and pulled her out of the hay and into the yard. The young woman stood like a broken doll and did not want to go anywhere. And how good she was even now, after a sleepless night. Seeing such girls as Julia, artists begin to paint pictures, poets to compose poems, well, and ordinary men just strangely, sweetly pinches the heart and want to open their arms and hide in them such a pure, bright beauty. Tall, but not a heron. Thin, but there is an appetizing stanza. Silky, flaxen-toned hair flowed in a natural lush wave up to the ass. On the face, a scattering of freckles at any time of year, so harmoniously emphasizing the unusual color of the girl's eyes, seemingly brown, dark, and in the iris embedded amber yellow, in the color of the eyes of a cat wild lynx. Please don't, Julia said quietly and sniffed her nose. Forgive me, please. John hummed forgive, well, of course. And maybe a hug and a kiss, too. That he, after what she'd done to him last night, would stay with her for one more minute. No way, not a chance. So the newlywed was dragged out into the courtyard as she was in her shirt and lace robe. Yesterday, we had a wedding. Noisy, rustic, cheerful. Everyone was celebrating and knew it would be a memorable wedding. because it wasn't just neighbors who got married, but characters of note. John was new to Pompeii. Well, as a newcomer, his father here kept a very profitable farm, where he grew all sorts of vegetables and sold them very profitable in the nearby cities. In general, of course, he could not compete with the mega-giant farmers, but he took, as they say, not quantity, but quality, and also about tomatoes, pumpkins, daikon, fashionable Japanese radish, and other vegetables. It was known that they are grown in an environmentally friendly way without any pesticides and herbicides, growth hormones. Many villagers worked for Jacob and did not complain because he paid normally and on time. He was a simple man, though as they said he was already a millionaire, and even if someone in the village had a need, he always helped. For example, he helped the Stoney family with a large number of children with their car when it broke down so that it could not be repaired, and old Mickey and Maria Petrov, in honor of their wedding anniversary and as a gift, installed an automatic irrigation system in their vegetable garden. In general, Jacob's business was going well in business, but his personal life did not go well. The only woman he loved left him and chose another man, not so attached to the land, and she took his son Jonah. Jacob saw his son only when his wife allowed it and accordingly could have little influence on his upbringing. And then Jacob Sobolev died. He was not old yet, and he was not 60, but only a blood clot broke off, and, in general, instantly. He fell down near his new greenhouse and never got up again. The whole world saw Jacob off for the last time, and then they wondered how things would go from now on. And soon the heir appeared, John, 25 years old. They had never seen him in the village before, because he and his father were only in contact when Jacob went out. John, because the people literally demanded to know how things were going to go on, said that his father had been doing things wrong and that he would redo everything. And that was the first sign. How to redo? What? What's going to happen to people's jobs? John said that's not their concern. The village people, in general, by and large, John was not particularly well liked. He seemed to try to get into his father's business, but it was felt that he was as far away from agriculture as possible, about as far away as the local boar producer called Truffle is from the social events in Monaco. But then for the fact that he still tried to settle down, and also because Jacob was his father, the locals decided to give John a kind of credit. He moved into Jacob's house. By the way, it was not a mansion, but an ordinary house, just a very good one. And then it came out that John was going to marry Julia, Selena's daughter, and it was strange and understandable at the same time. It was just that Selena was a very special local. Her parents were the kind of hard workers Pompeii had once been proud of, people who had set such records in the field and on the farm with dairy cows. But Selena, who grew up, by the way, into a written beauty, decided that this is not about her and went to the city to become a model and maybe even an actress or a singer. And in principle, it was clear to everyone that with such an ambition and such zeal, well, not long young, beautiful and stupid to get into the story. And so it was, judging by the fact that less than a year later Selena returned, quiet and with a huge potbelly. Then she went to town again. And everyone thought that after giving birth, she'd get rid of the baby there. I mean, give it to an orphanage. But Selena came back again, with her daughter. A lot of things for her, brought a stroller, clothes, and everything. And although Selena did not share with anyone nuances of her personal life and her parents also kept silent, the villagers had nothing else to do but to think that Julia's father probably does not want to take Selena as a wife, but her daughter is willing to provide for her in good conscience. And yet, the countrymen came to the conclusion that Selena had changed very firmly, silent, withdrawn. But what was the reason? They all decided to stay out of the human soul and slowly got used to it. But they still noted the new things that happened to Selena. So since her return, she liked to read not love stories, but serious things on philosophy, history, cultural studies. And in Selena's house, you could find all sorts of mystical things. Dreamcatcher, a crystal ball, brick crumbs scattered on the doorstep and windowsills, a bunch of black feathers in the center of the table instead of a bunch of flowers in a vase. Well, she had all sorts of things in her house. And amazingly, even Selena's parents were fine with it. And if anyone started asking questions, does it bother you? Does it bother you personally? That's the question the questioner would ask, and what was the answer? After all, neither Selena nor her parents had ever said anything that would make one suspect them of being sectarians. Just, suddenly people were a little strange. But it was a special time, the beginning of the new millennium. That is, a time when there was no time to squint too much at strangers and pry into other people's secrets, but to deal with one's own problems. And so lived Selena's family. Her parents retired, quietly fiddling in the vegetable garden. And the daughter, Julia? Oh, what a cutie grew up. An excellent student. Teachers couldn't get enough of the smart girl. But there was one thing about Julia. She grew up quiet. She didn't even have any friends. She played with herself, almost no one to communicate with. And when she entered the age of adolescence and then became a young girl, she began to seem like a fool a little bit, because she could listen to someone say something for a long time and not answer right away. Because she wouldn't let anyone touch her, physical contact with other people than her own family members apparently caused her some physical discomfort. But Julia was forgiven, because she was kind, calm, and once she was around, the sun seemed to shine brighter. She was such a special, positive girl. Local guys, of course, looked at her, but no one risked to start courtship. And then, when Julia turned 18, John moved to the village to deal with his inheritance. And what was the shock of surprise among the inhabitants of Pompeii when it became known that he wanted to marry Julia? And Celine agreed. "That's right," said Grandpa Steve. "She's had a bad luck herself, but at least she's made a good life for her daughter." "What luck?" Natalie objected. She and Mickey had been talking while standing in line at the store. "Julia doesn't even know John. She's always at home under Selena's supervision. No, going to the post office and the store doesn't count. No, it's not normal. She couldn't possibly be in love with this John." "Yeah, he is." Natalie pressed her lips together. "You all know he's a city boy, that's all. He's come to play in the dead man's father's business. You mark my words, he's got us all with his, what's his name? Innovative approach. He'll put us all in the world with this approach, and everything my father has earned will go into bankruptcy." And yet the wedding took place. The bride wore a beautiful and lush, like a princess from a fairy tale, snow-white dress. The groom paid. Julia was so beautiful, and what happened the morning after the wedding? Nobody expected such a turn. Not without difficulty. But they crossed the street, went down a little down. Not without difficulty, because despite the rather fragile parameters, Julia's stubborn and kept begging her to forgive, to give a second chance. But John was inexorable. He didn't need such a defective bride. "Good morning." His voice suddenly brought him out of his disappointed thoughts. Damn it, neither light nor dawn. And up came neighbor Natalie peering out of her polygarden, where she was digging in a peony bed. "Hello," she said, and shifted her curious gaze to Julia. "Good morning." John gritted his teeth and took his wife by the elbow and dragged her along. There was the mother-in-law's house. He banged on the gate with his fist. "Selena," he called out, and he looked back. No, Natalie was looking at him with all her eyes. And she was a famous gossip. But on the other hand, John realized that he'd given up his wife. It would be known anyway. And he didn't give a damn about it. He didn't care about Cranberry Top, whose inhabitants seemed to be stuck in their past and wanted to live in peace and contentment, as if time had frozen. But John realized it was impossible. Everything was changing and he had nothing to do with it. And how indifferent he was to the opinion of those who were soon to start talking about him very badly. And moreover, on matters not related to his family circumstances. Finally, the gate on the other side moved and Celine peeked out. What is it?" "Your daughter is a log," John shouted and pushed Julia, who had finally stopped sniffling and was roaring, into her mother's arms. Then, cursing hard, he stomped back. What a nonsense this wedding had turned out to be. No, he doesn't need a crazy woman as a wife. He should go to town today and file for divorce, and then, to finally deal with this inheritance, which is already like a bone in my throat. "What am I going to do with you?" Selena asked as she took her sobbing daughter from the yard to the house. "It's not my fault. I wanted everything to be right. I was just like you taught me." Julia was close to hysteria. She looked helplessly at her mother. She felt betrayed, dirty. She felt just broken. and she didn't understand it all anymore. Where was it right? If her mother was her authority and guide in a vast and dangerous world, suddenly so different, it had to be wrong. Celine sighed and rubbed her temples tiredly. Awful headache. However, in her lifetime, it would be strange if it didn't hurt. You just had to do what I say. And a few houses away from where the mother-daughter conversation was taking place, John was packing. He was just throwing the essentials into his bag and gritting his teeth, trying to chase away the aftertaste of a bad wedding night. No, he wasn't expecting magic from her. But anyway, he just wanted a good girl to marry. Modest, pure, not greedy for material wealth. In short, not like the woman who was his mother. And for the umpteenth time that thought struck him, and yet he was deprived of so little as the right to simply call her mom. No. Katie demanded that he, a barely out-of-diapers little boy, call her by her first name. And at first it was even easy and familiar. But as he grew older, a rebellion was brewing in John like this. Why can't you call her mommy? All the kids in the yard had moms. Simeon didn't have one though. His grandmother raised him, and his mom died. But it was still incomprehensible. Only once Katie went to his side and explained that such treatment made him feel old, second-rate. It was very offensive. But his parents' stern words, backed up sometimes by physical force, quickly helped him internalize the new rules. Jonah had forgotten what it was like to call the tall, coldly elegant blonde mom. He addressed her respectfully as Katie or even Olia if he sensed in his childish gut that she was in a good mood. It was only later, when he was a teenager, that John realized why the whole show was necessary. It was just that Katie's guests sometimes came to their posh duplex apartment. Sometimes they would pick her up and hand her a bouquet of flowers, which she left at home, telling John to trim the flower stems and put them in a vase. After her divorce from Jacob, Katie was anxious to get on with her personal life, and she didn't want to add to her solidity, especially in the perception of her lovers, by reminding herself and them that she had a child, which she believed and knew for a fact would happen if Jonah continued to call him mom, which was why she had abolished the word in their family and generally kept an emphatically polite and equally cool demeanor with the kid, as if they were neighbors at all. But Kathy was not an irresponsible parent, not at all. John had shoes, he was always well-fed, he had fancy clothes like his classmates, he had vacations abroad at sea, and when it was time to go to university, everything was paid for. And for all the provision of Joni was responsible for none other than his father Jacob. However, a great spiritual closeness between him and his son did not happen, because John was convinced that it was because of him, his indifference, that Kathy had become like this. By the time he turned 18, John was convinced that he did not love, did not respect his mother. He saw and understood that she was not even looking for love, but for profitable lovers. She was looking for a man who could simply provide her with the lifestyle to which she was accustomed. John's mother had once been what was called a socialite, but not because she had influential parents or anything successful of her own, just that she was still fresh and beautiful then, and had successfully learned to show off wherever she could meet wealthy men, one of whom had once become her patron. Then he was replaced by another businessman, and then there was an affair with Jacob, whom Katie hoped to lure into her net with her pregnancy. It didn't work. I mean, it did, but Jacob turned out to be a hard nut to crack. He didn't want to lavish his wife with money and leave the village and move to the city for good. That's why the divorce followed. By the time John was 18, Kathy was losing more and more, as he not without gloating even realized the competitiveness in this strange market of brides and lovers. Kathy was in despair a little more, and no one will be needed at all. And so, at some point, she married the owner of a chain of cheburette shops on the Black Sea coast, and went there. And the son, "You're a big boy." That was the only word she said to John when he came home from university and found her packing her suitcase. And although the guy had not known close mental closeness with his mother before, but now he somehow felt quite alone. He stayed in the apartment, the rent of which continued to be paid by his father. He continued to study and graduated from university. Then, through his father's acquaintances, he got a job, without work experience, but immediately became a boss. But they fired him just as quickly, because it was one thing, as Jacob was told by his acquaintance, to give a guy a chance to fulfill his potential without going through the startup process for a green newcomer, and quite another to put up with an autocrat and an inexperienced rascal who was lucky that he hadn't bankrupted the company in the few weeks he had been sitting in the office. Jacob said to his son, "No, boy, let's do things the right way." John thought his father was as indifferent to him as his mother. And then Jacob was gone. John took over his business and got involved right away because farming couldn't wait. And at first he seemed to be doing well, but then it all went wrong. Somehow I missed that moment. But even before it became clear that the business, which his father had built and kept afloat for so many years, had come to an end, John decided that he wanted to get married. And why not, he asked. Tired of being alone. Tired of spending his days and nights with girls who were, in fact, young copies of his own mother. John sometimes asked why he got such girls, and he never found an answer. It just happened. And then he saw her, Julia, and realized it was a dream. Not spoiled, pure. She'd make a good wife. So he went to Selena and Julia's house and asked for her daughter's hand in marriage. And even the old people, that is, Julia's grandparents, asked permission. In general, John perfectly understood that in the modern world, the main thing in the consent of the girl to marriage, and therefore, to the very first, he approached Julia. But she, having heard about his love at first sight, replied, as Mom says. So John went to Selena. And then, yes, he realized that Julia is not a modern girl. He was ready for timidity, embarrassment, but not to such madness. This madness bared its teeth and, figuratively speaking, showed its eyes glittering in the darkness when it was time for the first wedding night. "You'll protect me, won't you?" Julia asked. She was sitting in a negligee and robe. Her hair was loose and covered her seductive figure with a silk cloak. John, of course, was ready to protect. He didn't understand, though, from what, but he was ready. He felt like a knight. "I'm so scared," Julia sniffed. "He wants to get me." "Who?" John didn't understand, who was beginning to tire of her wailing about how afraid she was. Julia was saying something strange about how her mother had promised her that she wouldn't be affected by this. What wouldn't? That she wouldn't be taken away. Who wouldn't take her away? John didn't immediately realize it was Arnold. "Who's that?" The young husband sat down on the bed next to his wife. "Oh, just when he was getting hot, and then there you go." "A ghoul," Julia answered, and raised her shining, beautiful eyes to him. "A bad joke," John said. "He's always out there looking for me," Julia said. "And you took me away." "You're not kidding?" John asked, and he felt a little uncomfortable. "Do you know that? Well, vampires, ghouls don't exist." "Mom says there are, at least one," Julia said and lowered her eyes. John swallowed nervously. Now that's a twist. What a surprise. To him, his mother-in-law seemed an adequate, modern person without any craziness. A little strange, but on the whole, she was all right. And the madness had settled in his fiancée's head too. And what to do about it, he asked. "Julia," he said and put his arm around her shoulders. "We'll talk in the morning, okay? Come to me. Don't be afraid. No one will hurt you." The young wife was like a driftwood soaked in cold water from the river. She just froze when he hugged her and clasped her eyes tightly shut, furrowing her whole face. "Julia?" John called out to her confusedly. "Do what you have to do," the girl exhaled, and John was almost torn between two different feelings. First of all, he was laughing, right up to the point of nervous hysteria. Secondly, he was angry because, well, what the hell kind of nonsense from a girl of 18? It's like she grew up in the middle of nowhere in the taiga and doesn't feel anything for him at all. There was also a third deafening irritation and the realization that he had been deceived. It came after Julia added that all your carnal love is filth, once again filth, and filth that defiles the human body, and then he is easy prey for all sorts of evil. And the ghoul will definitely come. All right, that's enough. John talked to his young wife for an hour. Then another hour and another. Then he made tea and sat nervously sipping it, looking at her gloomily. And she sat with the tragic look of a maiden about to be sacrificed. And nothing good came out of the conversation. She was deaf to his words about how normal everything could be, that he loved her, and no, he was lying. He didn't love her. He thought she was a bargain, but it would seem, what's the big deal to say that you love her? It didn't hurt him, and he hoped it would help. John even tried instinctively to relieve her tension and stiffness. That is, he tried to kiss her, but she shrank even more and then sighed, so doomed, as if he was a ghoul himself and she was his victim. "Put me down on the wormwood and do whatever you want." "Do what?" John jerked away from Julia. He got up, walked across the room. "Oh, that's it." Sitting there like a doll, mumbling her nonsense. Of course, Julia is beautiful, and nothing, as they say, did not bode well. But John realized two things. First, he wasn't attracted to crazy logs. And two, he decided he was getting a divorce. Because again, a wife with oddities, which in the statue of marble turns into a marble if you want to kiss her, he was not interested. Amazing still, how during the wedding under the bitter Julia was given the kiss. It's not as if she's been conspiring with her mother to make him suffer so that she could get him to kiss her. And now it was finally over. John packed his things. He got in his car and drove into town to solve his problems as he saw fit. Selena looked at her daughter and realized that she was the only one to blame for what had happened. But unfortunately, the realization of the mistakes made came too late. "And I told you it would end like this," said Julia's grandfather. He had just come out of the room he shared with his wife Alexei, used to get up with the first rooster. "Back so." "Dad, don't start, please." Selena rubbed her face with her palms. "And I told you that you're wrong." "Daddy, please." Selena clenched her eyes tightly. What had she done? Okay, she was a young fool herself. She got into trouble. But through this, she ruined her daughter's life, almost turned her into a madwoman. And it all started when Selena came to town. Then such were the times rattled among friends' stories about how having only two capital youth and a pretty face, any girl can gloriously settle in life. To arrange a dulce vita, Selena believed that fate favored her because when she arrived in the city, she did not have to sleep at the train stations and sheltered student friends in a bargain rented an apartment. True, only one of them adhered to this strategy. That is, all the riches of the world for pretty eyes was going to get. 3 other girls were going to study to become a teacher, cook, hairdresser, and animal breeder. "No way," giggling, said Ariana the inspirer, when late in the evening they sat down secretly in the kitchen to drink tea. The other girls had already gone to bed because they were following the regimen, studying a lot, worked in parallel. In general, were so right that it's sickening. "Everything will be fine with you," Ariana winked, unwrapping a shiny package of chocolate rolls and sneaking tea with delicious things from her friends. "It was just a pity to share. I know one person and he knows another. Anyway," Ariana waved her pen with long red fingernails. "We'll go tomorrow." "Oh," said Celine and gripped her tea mug tighter as if it were a shield. "Are you sure it's going to be all right? They say in the papers." "They say about the ones on the highway," Ariana said seriously. "They are caught by all kinds of maniacs. And where have you heard that they caught even one millionaire maniac? Here, that's the same thing. It's just that there are wealthy men who know how to be gallant." Ariana rolled her beautiful blue eyes. "And are willing to repay them handsomely for it." Naturally, Selena's parents had no idea what their little girl was going to do in the city. They barely accepted the fact that she decided to enter the theater school. Selena knew the truth would have made both of them heartbroken. Ariana wasn't really her closest friend, but she was the kind of girl who broke all the established rules, who like a magnet pulls you along. She was 2 years older than Selena and as a former promised to teach her all the wisdom of the craft. But later, because right now, as Ariana said, it was Selena's inexperience that was of the greatest value. It turned out that there were men who would rather have fun with an untouched maiden. The very next day, Ariana took her friend to a cafe, where a woman procurer was waiting for them at the table. She introduced herself as Nancy and scrutinized the new girl. She asked her about her life in the village, about her personal qualities, about things that made Selena blush. And then she said that Selena and Ariana could go out together to order. There's a party coming up and there's a desperate need for hot, young girls. Nancy named such a price for Selena's services that Selena's jaw dropped at the cost of so much to buy: beautiful dresses, a new refrigerator for her parents, gold jewelry. "Why are you like this?" Selena asked her friend when they had already left the cafe. Ariana adjusted her umbrella. The stormy wind was tearing it from her hands. She frowned, apparently thinking it over. Never mind. Nonsense, it was just a feeling. What's a hunch? Selena didn't understand. Don't laugh, okay? Her friend said pathetically, and Celine nodded. My great-grandmother knew how to fortune tell. Well, and as if her gift to me a little bit passed on. And she also sensed trouble. In general, I once did not want to go to order and then like goosebumps on my back walked. The feeling was that in the chest pinches. And what happened? Selena got suspicious. Not paid, laughed Ariana. Oh, never mind. Then I was a fool to go as an individual. And with Nancy, we've been working for a long time. It's gonna be fine. Come on, hurry up. Ariana raised her head to the sky. Let's get to the subway or it's gonna hail. Ariana didn't tell her friend that this time, instead of goosebumps, she felt the cold of the grave and her heart stopped for a few moments. The girls arrived at a party at some country house, and they were somewhat surprised because there were not many people at it, and these people were not really like generous, ready for vicious entertainment men. They were just men in black suits and masks, like those worn at a carnival in Venice. Quiet music was playing in the halls, lit for some reason by candles. People were walking, talking among themselves. There were 8 of them here, but otherwise the country house seemed extinct, and in general it seemed uninhabited. Even most of the furniture was hidden by covers. The girls came to a party in some country house, and they were somewhat surprised because there were not many people at it, and these people were not really like generous, ready for vicious entertainment men. They were just men in black suits and masks, like those worn at a carnival in Venice. Quiet music was playing in the halls, lit for some reason by candles. People were walking, talking among themselves. There were 8 of them here, but otherwise the country house seemed extinct. It seemed uninhabited. Even most of the furniture was hidden by covers. And I thought it would be, well, said Celine, who for some reason was a bit scared here. Otherwise, like in the movies, well, when there are receptions, guests. Me too, said Ariana through her teeth, who didn't like it at all. And here you are, my dears. Suddenly the guests parted and a man approached the girls. He was about 40 years old. He was tall, thin, and very pale. He was dressed in a black suit and a scarlet shirt. A ruby ring glittered on his hand. Well, look at them, said the man in charge, and suddenly grasped Zena's chin with dry fingers with yellowish, sloppy, long nails. How good she is. The people gathered around were silent and just stared at the girls. Someone let out a nervous laugh and immediately coughed, saying, "Excuse me. If someone wants to leave," said the strange man, "now is the time. But remember, if you stay, there is no going back." Well, he continued, when his proposal was met with silence and no one moved. "Let us begin. Bring the nectar of life," the host exclaimed, and immediately a tray with 2 glasses was handed to him. "Drink," he smiled. "Drink up, girls. Help yourselves." Celine froze. She'd heard all sorts of things about what night butterflies did. Ariana had told her, inexperienced as she was, all sorts of things, but nothing like what was going on in those stories. "Thank you, but I don't drink alcohol." Selena finally got it out of her. "But you'll have to drink," the man said with a smile, as if he was a retarded fool. And then Selena, obeying as if a hypnotic impulse, reached for the glass. Why am I doing this? Her mind raced, but her lips had already touched the silver edge of the glass and her mouth was burned with a spicy, thick drink. It was like grape juice, and at the same time it was strangely bitter. It had a suspicious metallic flavor. Celine saw that her friend was drinking too. They drained the glasses. They returned them to the tray. Selena was about to ask what was going on and when they were going to work, but then, Ariana, she just rolled her eyes and collapsed to the floor. Celine cried out and immediately leaned over her, shaking her, calling out. "Call an ambulance," she shouted, looking up at the people in the room pleadingly. "Help, do something." But they just stared, indifferently or with a strange curiosity. They came closer, surrounded. "Leave her," the master said with genuine sympathy in his voice. "Leave her and accept your fate, child." "What? What are you? What are you talking about?" Selena, sobbing, smeared mascara on her face. "No," she shrieked as one of the men, a tall, balding big man, grabbed her under the armpits and pulled her up. Poison. There was poison in one of the goblets, the master explained calmly to the girl. You could have drunk it, not your friend, but she would have died anyway. And so, if you're alive, then. His fingers reached for her again. Celine shook her head, but his nailed fingers dug hard below her jaw, pressing on her neck. You are chosen, child. You are chosen for a great purpose. Rejoice. Everything that happened afterwards became a nightmare for Celine. She lost track of time. She tried to deny her own body, for which there seemed to be no limit to the pain and agony. She longed to lose consciousness, but she wasn't allowed to. It was an endless nightmare come to life. A nightmare that brought to life what she thought were legends, horror stories, but then it was all over. Selena remembered the light suddenly bursting into the house. Lots of light. She remembered how the bindings on her legs and arms were cut, how her body, which had been lying on the stone altar for so long that it seemed to have already fused with it, was lifted gently. She was wrapped in a blanket. She was told that everything would be all right, except the ones who saved her, the ones who made her tormentors flee. They came too late. Celine had already lost her mind. She thought she was losing her mind, and it was strange, because before Selena thought that crazy people didn't realize their madness. And then a little more time passed, and she realized that the most nightmarish details of what was happening to her, they were real. She was convinced of this after being told that that man, the master and leader of the sect, he had disappeared, just vanished into the forest. His footprints were lost in the swamp, and it was all over. He disappeared. They said he must have died because the nights in the forest were cold, and the swamps were dead, impassable, except Celine didn't believe it. She understood his scarlet eyes too well, and in vain the psychiatrist tried to tell her that it was just the flames of candles reflected on his irises. She remembered all too well the sounds that could not belong to a human being. And in vain the psychiatrist tried to explain to her that it was her mind distorting what had happened. She remembered all too well how this non-human had suddenly developed fangs and bit into her neck, and completely in vain the psychiatrist said that it was just a show, just the actions of a mad sectarian, and the fangs were certainly superimposed. Selena was in the hospital for a long time. She was given some kind of pills shortly after being rescued. But then suddenly, when she started complaining about feeling bad and the doctor looked at her again, there was a scandal in the hospital. It turned out that due to an oversight, Selena was given emergency contraceptive pills with expired expiration date, and they had worked properly, and now she was pregnant. Selena didn't know that her parents had been informed of what had happened almost immediately, and they had visited her in the hospital. It was just that her mind had been so clouded by the horrors of the experience that she hadn't even recognized them. Selena's parents were told what happened. Yes, their daughter had gotten mixed up with a bad crowd. Her friend died, and Selena, apparently because she was a virgin, they decided to use her for the ritual. It was a sect whose members believed their leader was a descendant of Count Dracula himself. He promised them that by sacrificing a pure girl, they could gain unprecedented power and authority. They were all captured, except for the very descendant of the vampire ruler, as he called himself. Theoretically, there was still time to terminate the pregnancy, but the doctor said afterward, since they missed the normal time frame, Selena would never have children again. The parents sighed. They were in shock, but realizing that there was no one to take care of their daughter but them, they held on. The parents sighed and talked to Selena about everything. They said they'd accept whatever decision she made, and she said she couldn't get rid of the baby. Just can't go to the trouble of taking someone else's life after that subhuman almost took hers. So we all went back to the village together, and then they decided that since the pregnancy was complicated, that it was necessary to go not to the small district center to give birth, but to the city. And then something else happened there. Selena's parents and she herself almost went crazy with fright at first. The thing is, a man showed up at the birth center. He introduced himself as Arnold's brother, the cult leader's name. He said he'd only recently found out what had happened. This man's name was Mickey. He said he had no idea what his brother was doing as he was going crazy. It turned out that Mickey and his family had a successful business and were millionaires. And now he was begging to be allowed to support Selena and her baby. Because Mickey felt partly responsible for what had happened, and because he wanted to take care of Selena's own still blood, that is, Selena's baby. At first, Selena and her dad and mom took it in a flip. "We don't need your dirty money." But then it suddenly became clear that the pregnancy is so complicated that it needs a lot of additional expenses, and had to accept the help. But they set the condition that they will raise the child themselves. "We can only see him sometimes, and help financially. No more interference, please." Mickey was all for it. That's how little Julia got the necessary things, expensive strollers, toys, and so on. Mickey kept his word. He did not interfere in Julia's upbringing. Sometimes Selena took her daughter under the pretext that she was going to visit her acquaintances, which was said, of course, for the village neighbors, and took her to the city. There they would visit Mickey, then they would go back. Mickey noticed too late the oddities in Selena's behavior and the way she'd raised Julia. But what could he do? Wrestle the child back by force? How? He could theoretically, but to some extent, he waved his hand, thinking that he had little moral right to do so, and brought up Selena Julia in accordance with how her own worldview has changed, turned over the years. The first years, Selena really believed in what she was told by serious people, the same doctor, psychiatrist, Mole. Arnold was crazy. No, he is not a ghoul. But then Selena's attention began to cling more and more often on TV programs, which told of mysticism, conspiracy theories, and all this was found official confirmation. She read about it in the newspapers, and she didn't listen to what her parents said. "It's all pseudoscience. So, according to you, everyone is lying?" Selena asked with a sly squint and shook her head, saying, "I know the truth." And gradually Selena began to put special ideas into her daughter's head. The girl grew up on fairy tales. It would seem that what is special about it, except that Selena's fairy tales were often uncensored. They were full of primal creepiness and good in them, one not always. And if other children at a certain point began to clearly realize where the truth and where fiction, Julia grew up with the confidence that the world around is full of everything. It's just that the people around her are so stupid that they prefer not to notice it, because the truth is too scary to know. But Mom and her are brave. That's why they know the truth, and Mom knows how to protect herself from it. "Do you know that this professor is not real?" her father asked Selena when she was watching an American documentary about the history of vampirism. "I've learned they sometimes invite actors to the programs and dress them up as, say, such and such a scientist. It's to make the theory more interesting for the audience. But in reality, it's all just to get people to watch and ratings for the program." Selena paused the program she was watching with subtitles and frowned. "You think everyone is lying? Why is it that your truth can exist and mine can't?" "It's okay. I'm not bothering you," sighed her father. In general, he and her mother over the years, of course, more than once discussed the state of her daughter. It worried them very much, but what could they do? Dragging Selena to the doctors again. And besides, they were afraid that the doctors would not decide that Selena had a diagnosis and would not deprive her of parental rights. Julia would risk going to an orphanage. "Okay," Selena's mom said one day, "our daughter is quiet, decent. Now she's decent. She does not chase anyone, as they say, with an axe. So why bother her? Let her live as she knows." "I agree," my father nodded. "But Julia, what kind of a mother will she grow up to be?" "Well," shrugged the woman and looked at her granddaughter, who was quietly in the corner with a book at the age of 9. She was terribly fascinated by the history of Renaissance painting, and Mickey had given her some fancy books with photo illustrations from the city. "You know, look, she's doing pretty well in school, right? Well, she's growing up quiet. But maybe when she grows up, she won't drink, smoke, or hang around with boys." Selena's parents feared more than anything in the world that their granddaughter would not repeat the fate of her mother even remotely. And so, watching how quietly withdrawn Julia is growing up, they even rejoiced. And Julia, by the way, did not care. She got used to almost be, as they call it, on the minimum connection with the world around her. Yes, she communicated with people, but she drew her feelings from books, where she could get so many stories of true love and incredible adventures. No, at some point, Julia's natural interest in the world woke up. She once told her mother that she would like to get married, to go on a trip one day. Julia, in general, the more she grew up, the less she believed in her mother's stories about ghouls and the like. But still, she could not completely deny this belief. And then Mom decided to marry Julia off because Selena decided it was time for her daughter to have a normal life. She can't live her whole life with her. It's just not normal. And who could be a better party for this than the heir of the village businessman? Selena didn't think much about the fact that her beautiful daughter, a barely blossomed flower, was not ready for family life. The thing was that in her 18 years, Julia had a very vague idea of what physical love between a man and a woman was. She was not a fool in this respect, but she thought it was a filth, a vice, an insult to the female body. But she also understood that she had to get married or she would be a fool and a loser. Yes, this is how these views coexisted in Selena's head. She wanted to protect her daughter from the world and to arrange her fate. Julia didn't love John. She thought her mother knew what was best for her. She even listened to her mother's admonition that she should do whatever her husband told her to do. But she couldn't. As soon as they were alone together, Julia had a nervous breakdown. She doesn't know this man at all. Julia suddenly remembered her mother's story that as soon as a girl loses her innocence, she becomes vulnerable to the forces of evil. And that night, when her young husband reached out to her, Julia was suddenly sincerely, wholeheartedly afraid that she might be visited by the ghoul her mother sometimes said. The thing was, sometimes Selena would have, seizures. She'd have nightmares sometimes when she'd quit her sedatives for a while. And then she would jump out of bed in the middle of the night screaming and start wailing about how he was a ghoul, heir to Dracula. He wanted to find her. He's going after her. Oh, I mean not her, but her daughter. He wants Julia. And so, as a result of such a bizarre mixture of the consequences of upbringing and lack of love and any strong sympathy, Julia could not honorably spend the wedding night in the arms of her husband. That's how she returned home. And now Selena finally realized what she had done, how wrong she had been. In general, she came to this realization slowly. How did it happen? It wasn't psychologists or psychiatrists who helped her. It was just that one day Selena suddenly looked back on her life and what did she see there? Yes, she had a disaster. You wouldn't wish it on an enemy, but there was a family nearby. She had a daughter, and the baby was no reminder of the horror. Selena had loved the baby with all her heart from the moment she first held her in her arms. It was as if a certain part of her life, Selena had worn glasses on her eyes, not just shading, but distorting reality, and now they had fallen. She suddenly realized with a dizzyingly frightening clarity what she had done. She had allowed madness to take hold of her. She had plunged her own daughter into its depths. No, Selena's superstitions had not completely gone away, but they had weakened enough for her to perceive reality more or less clearly. And then, in an attempt to arrange Julia's fate, Selena pushed her into the arms of a man she didn't even know. However, the latter, Selena thought, could have been a good thing, because in the old days it was normal to marry like that at the will of their parents. And many ended up becoming happy couples, but still. So I only have one suggestion, said Selena's father. We're idiots. We've run things to the edge, and there's only one person who can unravel it all. Call Mickey. So they did. In fact, Mickey didn't know about the wedding. He'd been saying for a long time that when Julia turned 18, she should come to town to see him. He promised that he would arrange Julia in the city, that he had qualified acquaintances from a private clinic, where they treat all kinds of addictions, nervous disorders. Daughter, Selena said and suddenly hugged Julia tightly. I don't apologize. I've done too much wrong. But now listen to me one last time, okay? What? Julia sniffed her nose. Should I? Should I go apologize to him and ask him back? No, Selena sighed. But you should go to Uncle Mickey's. Julia looked up in amazement. She just adored Mickey. That man. It was a strange, wonderful feeling, but his presence was always. It was like a fresh breeze on a sultry summer afternoon. Next to him, it always began to seem that the world was not as scary as it seemed. Next to him, Julia became braver. It was just a pity that her mother didn't let her go and visit him often. But now, Julia wrinkled her nose, thinking about going back to John. He's mean, he's rude, and she doesn't like him at all, and she doesn't want to put up with it, so that later, according to the age-old folk wisdom, she can love him. All right, I'll go. And will you obey him? With a sad smile asked Selena, stroking her daughter's head. I will. Selena dialed a number. Mickey answered. It turned out that he had just recently returned from a business trip and was about to call and ask how things were going. Anticipating the storm, but also ready for it, Selena said that she, in general, ready to give Julia under the full protection of Mickey. Let him help the girl as he sees fit. And let Julia see a good private psychiatrist who can help her clear her head about the world, and let her also support her through the divorce process. What? Mickey exclaimed. What divorce? When did she ever get married? Yes, he added, after listening to Selena's confused and brief explanation. It's the first time I've ever wished I'd left a girl in your care. I could have taken her back if I'd had the chance. Okay, she's my niece, I'll help. The same day Julia left the village. It was in the afternoon, so that the whole street could see how a black SUV arrived and how Julia got into it with one small bag of things. What's wrong? Glafira asked the postmistress. Nothing, answered Selena, seeing the car with her daughter with a look hazy with tears. Just life happened. Days passed, months opened and closed seasons one after another, and so almost 3 years passed. And during this time, a lot has changed in Pompeii. For one thing, the farm, once so firmly established by Jacob, had finally fallen into disrepair. The locals had no doubt John had destroyed what could still be saved. In fact, the farm was fine. It was only necessary to take it into his hands and not to miss important moments, for example, to harvest and sell everything in time. And then, of course, to prepare for the next season, and so on. However, what did John do? And nothing in 1,000 times worse, as said the old residents of Pompeii, and spit from the fullness of feeling because John spoiled everything. And by the way, people almost went to him to worship him. We've worked with Jacob for almost 20 years, said Sam, who under the old owner was responsible for making sure the land was well dug and fertilized in the fall. We're willing to help and even wait for a paycheck if there are, well, temporary difficulties. It would seem that this is it. It comes into your hands. Here came to you a delegation of people who grew up on the land, the soul, as they say, attached to it. Why not accept their help? But John barked his own, I will optimize everything, do everything competently. I have consultants from the capital with innovative solutions. And how did it all end? The whole place went under the hammer, because bankruptcy. But things were not good at all, because John, while he was farming, managed to ruin some of the land by spilling some of the chemicals that were meant for insect control, but in brutal quantities. Then, he neglected fire safety and some of it burned down. So now the rest of Jacob's property was a sad and heartbreaking sight. As for John himself, he had lost his majoritarian look and had moved from the city to the countryside, but he still had a house. And that one was under collateral. The guy took a loan to repay another loan, which was to repay more loans. In general, everything was difficult and hopeless. The only thing missing as a cherry on the cake was that John had fallen asleep. But he, to everyone's surprise, often walked around just sober and angry. And then, one day in the fall, a motorcade came to the village. Barry was just dragging by the scruff of the neck his 2 youngest children, twins Seriosa and Petia, who were running away to the lake, where they were trying to catch pikes on fishing rods found in the pantry. Barry had nothing against fishing, but he didn't want the little thing, which was not even 6 years old. So this Valerie guy was almost run over by the lead jeep of the motorcade. No, what is this? He shrieked, recoiling to the side. Look where you're going. This is not for you to race in the city. What? You think you're the smartest? He stepped closer, intending to say everything in the face of the one who would get out of the car, but froze, as if struck by lightning. Because first the driver got out of the car, and then he opened the backseat door, and from there, well, the first thing Barry judged was the legs. No, they were legs. Slender female and very long, wearing scarlet stiletto heels. Then the whole passenger showed up. A snow-white slip dress, a white jacket thrown over her shoulders, blonde curls, scarlet lipstick, With an elegantly careless gesture, she took off her sunglasses. "Hello, Barry." There's no way, thought the father of many children, that it could be her. "Julia?" he asked, shocked. She smiled as warmly, brightly, and openly as ever. "Have I changed so much that they didn't recognize me?" Barry shook his head. "No different, still the same girl. And yet, now it's already a woman, spectacular as her." Ah, Barry realized, what is the word for a lady from a glossy magazine or a TV series about the life of millionaires? In fact, not a word had been said about Julia for years, except those rare words that dropped Selena mold, "All is well at the daughter," at the relatives' visit further. "What about you?" Barry said. "Home?" "Not exactly," Julia smiled. "So stop by to look at what I bought. We need to start. There's a lot of work." "What did you buy?" "What work?" Barry scratched the back of his head. "We don't have much work around here. We haven't had a sawmill in years. Jacob's place is a wasteland, and now you can build." Julia opened her mouth to answer, but she was called out. A new character, John, was outside. He had gone out, actually, to go to the store to buy a couple cans of canned goods and bread. Lately, he'd been sitting in the house, which was beginning to fall apart, and only went out for provisions. "Julia?" John exhaled and looked at her as if she were a ghost. "Oh, the wife is back." John's lips spread into a silly smile. He had been suffering from severe insomnia lately and looked like a drunk. "Alexander, the papers," Julia said coldly. The burly man who had been her driver reached into the car and handed her a folder of papers. Julia walked elegantly, lightly down the dusty country road in her scarlet shoes with a model's gait and handed the folder to John. She handed it to John and gave him a shove in the chest that made him stagger. "Here, all the papers for Jacob's household. I own everything now," she said. And then, watching her ex-husband's eyes widen in shock, she added with a smile like a tigress smiling over her prey's head, "And the house is mine now too. I bought your debt. So, you, John, are now nothing and nobody here. But..." And suddenly Julia grabbed him by the collar of his jacket, literally yanked him to her, and breathed out into his lips, almost smearing scarlet lipstick on them. "If you make the right decision, if you're a good boy, you can still fix some things." With that, she turned and walked to the car. "Good afternoon, Grandpa Steve," she greeted her neighbor. Then she waved her hand to this and that villager. Well, just like a queen greeting her subjects. And then Julia just got into her expensive SUV with a driver and drove away with 2 more cars. And the people of Pompeii were left wondering what the hell that was all about. "Well, what was it?" asked Barry, and the same could be repeated by other villagers who witnessed this extraordinary scene. Only the 4 dogs Tuzik, who was dragging in his teeth a sausage dropped by someone in the store, the goat Belyanaka, who had escaped from her mistress to have a good time in other people's gardens, and the twins who, anticipating a generous beating from their mother, decided to take advantage of the fact that their father had let his guard down and ran along the same route as the goat Belyanaka. "I'd like to get on with my life." Barry waved his hand at everything and everyone and followed the fugitives. "Julia, I apologize for sticking my nose where it doesn't belong, but how are you?" the driver asked. "I'm fine," answered the girl from the back seat. But Alexander saw through the rearview mirror that she was far from all right. Her jaw was tense, her eyes squinted. It's always difficult with exes. Usually Alexander was a little wordy, but here, just as an instinct led that it is not necessary to leave the mistress alone with his thoughts. "I remember. I met mine once, and he began to tell me how hard it was for him after his divorce, which was initiated after he caught his wife in bed with his best friend." Julia listened, and at the same time was immersed in her own experiences. Well, what could she say about herself? Well done. The first time she'd seen John on the morning of her wedding night, and she'd done it, and it had seemed like it. Then, a few years ago, when Mickey had taken her to the city, Julia had felt like a quail in a snares, a tiny autumn leaf carried by the stormy wind. She had so little contact with her uncle that he sometimes seemed a stranger to her. And at the same time she was drawn to him, Mickey almost literally radiated light and warmth, and every time Selena let them see each other, it was as if he energized Julia, and she began to look at the world, Well, more positively and realistically, which, by the way, her mother didn't like. "I'm sorry, niece, I didn't see it coming," Mickey said as they drove into town. "It's wild to get married. You should have. You should have called me. I wouldn't have let you. To hell with her trip. We could have waited. But you. Oh well, I see you're not in the mood to talk now. It's nothing. What's important is that your mother seems to have come to her senses a little." Mickey hadn't told Julia the secret of her origins yet. It would be abnormal and inhuman to talk to an underage girl about such things. And besides, in the first place, Mickey feared that the truth, even now that Julia had become an adult, could simply have a very negative impact on her psyche. But now he was quietly rejoicing that Selena had finally realized that her daughter didn't have to live according to her own habits, that she had finally realized that a little more life in such an atmosphere and Julia could be sent to the clinic. "I don't want to go home," Julia said suddenly from the back seat, and then added so quietly that he barely heard, "I think I'm going crazy." "Why do you think that?" Mickey asked cautiously. Because Julia bit her lips painfully to the scarlet mark, and only thanks to this burning, self-inflicted pain, kept herself from crying. "Mom says one thing, Grandma and Grandpa another. Who should I believe? I think I know something very important, and what I do know scares me." "You know, Julia, I'm sorry for you," Mickey said and gripped the steering wheel tighter with his fingers. "Maybe I shouldn't have trusted you with this family, but now, do you really want me to help you?" "Yes," the girl answered confidently. "Will you take me to the clinic? Will they treat me?" "What? Julia, don't you dare think that. You're going to live with me, in the same room you used to stay in, okay?" Mickey smiled. His mansion always had 2 rooms ready for the young guest, a bedroom and a living room, decorated in a very girlish style. "I want to bring in some specialists, psychologists. They can help you. No, you can't treat for beliefs in personal faith, you know. You did not see ghouls and evil things about which Mom told you in the corners?" "No," the girl shook her head. "I've never even seen flying saucers, only comets." "You're a smart girl." "No, it's just that you're confused." "Yes, now in the world many people believe in psychics, Bigfoot, and many other things. And sometimes there is nothing, well, so only you. Unfortunately, all this." Head clouded, Julia finished for her uncle. "It's ruining your life. Is that what you mean?" "Yeah," sighed Mickey. "How are you? Are you all right?" "He didn't touch me," Julia said, guessing from her uncle's confused tone what the question was about. Can I stay with you a little longer? And also, will you tell me about my father? My mom doesn't want to talk about it." "It'll happen. I'll tell you everything," nodded Mickey and was silent for a while. There were more cars on the road and he, as a responsible driver, decided to concentrate on getting home properly. And at the same time, so some very serious and heavy conversations were postponed for a while. It was time for Julia to start living normally. It was time for her to know the truth. Much later, looking back, Julia did not understand how she had managed to live to the age of 18 in a relatively clear mind. Not that the atmosphere of her growing up had been completely insane, and yet, every day of her existence she was like a tightrope walker who must hold on, balancing on a terrible height. Mickey's society, as always, had a calming effect on Julia, and conversations with psychologists and even a psychiatrist, invited from a private clinic, were not scary at all. "In general, I usually do not rush to conclusions for my patients," the psychiatrist told her Billy. "But here I can say for sure, don't be afraid, my dear. You don't have schizophrenia. You are, pardon my candor, but except for the dreary superstitions planted in your young head, you will be healthier than many of my patients." So, Billy in his 60s was still practicing and considered one of the best specialists around. Just live the life of a young, modern girl. Study, have fun, stay hydrated, get at least 8 hours of sleep, and fall in love. "Well, honey, why are you looking at me like that?" Love, you know, can really do wonders and help sometimes where any therapy and pills are powerless. Mickey was lonely, no wife, no children, and accordingly, he lived alone. In fact, he had a mistress. To be precise, they changed about once every year or two. That is, with the same frequency as his personal cars. But he never allowed these women into his inner circle, Julia. And in fact, They lived in the mansion as a small family, Julia, Mickey, and all sorts of servants, but not numerous. They didn't keep Julia locked up. On the contrary, Mickey insisted that she should go out on the town. And to keep her safe and secure, she was accompanied by a guard and the invariable driver and personal assistant Alexander, all in one person. Plus, Mickey often gave Julia extra security because he had once survived an unsuccessful assassination attempt from business rivals, and since then he had been extremely careful. And then, when Julia felt better and when she was finally able to shed the fears of the beyond that Selena had instilled in her, that was about 6 months after her arrival, she and Mickey had talked. He revealed to her the truth about her father, and that, naturally, came as a shock. Julia wanted to go to her mother and talk about everything. Then she spoke with despair that she was sick of going out into the world and look into the eyes of people because her father is a monster in the guise of a man, a sectarian. How am I supposed to live with the fact that he was my brother? Mickey asked her once, taking advantage of a brief pause in her hysterics. What's it like for me to live with the fact that this was once my own man? How does it make me feel to think that maybe it was somehow my fault for not looking after him? Mickey told Julia a lot of things about himself. He was Arnold's younger brother. Their parents were the sort of people who are remarkably good at being in any era and always, as they say, cleverly organized. Both father and mother devoted themselves to science. Historian and art historian with a common passion for the era between the 14th and 16th centuries. That was a special period, and at home there were many reproductions of paintings from that era, skillful imitations of all sorts of antiquities. Arnold and Mickey grew up with nannies and tutors, and their parents, well, they were very busy, and they were very strict. What about the twos and twos, the pranks, the failing grades? No, their sons were obliged to be excellent students, and besides, their parents dreamed that they would follow in their footsteps. One of the most vivid memories of Mickey's childhood was the episode when the 13-year-old Misha had to retell his father some legends about the Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who was famous for torturing and destroying her maids, peasant daughters, and even the daughters of noblemen under her control, all for the sake of staying young forever through black magic. Arnold retold colorfully, in gruesome detail, legends, and then his father began to ask questions on the landmark dates of Hungarian history. And Arnold made a mistake. He couldn't remember one date. Then his father got up, said that you can't be so bad, and without listening to the son's pleas, just took and closed him in a dark closet. Yes, despite the fact that Arnold was already big, he was hysterically afraid of that closet. When he was 5 years old, his parents had once locked him in there all night. And in that closet, by the way, they kept a stuffed hare with horns and boar's tusks attached to it, an anniversary present from a joker hunter who knew the family. And there was also an antique mirror in the closet. Mickey shared with Julie the idea that it was possible. It was the educational sessions in that closet that pushed Arnold to the fact that then he went crazy. In general, even in childhood, he had attacks of aggression, but his parents did not pay attention to it. Then, in the early 90s, they were gone. Mickey decided to go into business. The time was such that it seemed like you could just stretch out your hand and catch millions in the air. But Arnold, he started selling some of his parents' collection. And at some point, apparently, antiques wish to buy people who are fond of mysticism. And then Arnold, through this company, finally moved his mind. He decided that why not organize a cult himself. Mickey was against his brother's new hobby. He tried to save Arnold, but he scoffed, said Mickey didn't know what he was giving up. What was I supposed to do? I was an idiot for nothing. I should have just given up, Mickey said with sincere regret. I thought he'd get over it. And then I heard he got into something really bad, that he thought he was Dracula's heir. And then Mickey sighed heavily and took Julia's hand. She didn't take it away. She just silently accepted the revelations about the past of her family, absorbing them like a sponge, saving them up, not yet knowing what she was going to do with them. And then Mickey found out what his brother had gotten himself into. He was horrified, and he felt guilty and, in some way, involved in the fate of that unfortunate girl, Selena. He decided that he could not turn his back on the fact that she was having a child, a nephew or a niece. And when he learned that Julia had been born, he realized that he had never loved anyone as much as he loved her. She had become his dearest person. But above all, respecting the will of her mother and grandparents, he stayed away. Didn't allow himself to interfere any more than they agreed to accept help. But now that Julia was an adult, Mickey decided it was time for her to choose for herself, and if only she wanted to. Julia confessed to her uncle that his company had always been her safe haven. Yes, she loved her mother, in spite of everything, but now it was as if she stood at a crossroads, and she already knew which road to take. And then something surprising and bitter was revealed. It turned out that Selena didn't want to see her daughter. I mean, they'd seen each other over the years, but only a few times when Selena was in town. And then one day, she said the following to Julia: "I kept you alive because I wouldn't have any more children. I raised you. I wanted to protect you as best I could. I'm sorry, my daughter, if I've done wrong or hurt you. But now I want to live alone. Just let me live." From Julia, who was going to ask if we could go home to the country for a couple of months of warm summer, Mom. Julia's hands, as they say, were down and her heart sank. But she found the strength to smile and say, "Okay, Mom, thank you for everything. And then I'll try to do it myself. Okay, I won't bother you." But no matter how painful it was, Julia couldn't help but admit that during these couple of years spent with her uncle, she had gained much more than in her whole previous life. She was no longer so afraid of crowded places. She had learned to speak freely to strangers and even to argue. Mickey paid for her to go to university, and although Julia was a part-time student, she made friends there. And one day, Mickey honestly told her that "I have a big business. I do real estate, farming, and one day it will all be yours." At first, Julia refused to say that she didn't count on it at all. It's not hers at all. She's not worthy, and so on. But Mickey then looked at her carefully and said, "But I got no one else to leave it to. There isn't another relative in the world." And so Julia agreed. One day, Mickey told her he bought some land in his native Pompeii. Imagine, it belonged to your ex-husband, and he said, "Would you like to try your hand as a business lady here? Let's say, in your native land?" Julia was a little shocked by such a proposal, but after thinking about it, agreed. "Don't tell me you want to get back at that guy," Mickey said with a smile. "Though if I were you," he added thoughtfully, "not that I want revenge, but you want to show him what you've become, don't you? So he'll see that there's no more of that young silly girl he got easily, like a chicken at the market." Julia was not offended by this humorous description of her own past. From a certain point on, she and her uncle had a very fine feeling for each other and were on the same wavelength. She nodded and said that yes, that was it. "That's a good girl," Mickey said and stroked his niece's head. "Sometimes you have to say goodbye to the past, even though it hurts, but then you can move on." Just the day after John ran into the young wife he had left behind, who had returned as a gorgeous business lady, the whole village knew about it, and almost all the villagers were unanimous in saying that John, a major who had let his father's inheritance go to the wind, had been flicked on the nose by fate. He did not like, you see, something came to him pure, glorious Julia. But the mother-in-law, as they said, did not hesitate to send her daughter to those mysterious relatives in the city. And now, please, life has put everything in its place. Nobody expected that everything would turn out this way. Grandpa Steve summed up the story enthusiastically, retelling it for what must have been the 100th time, and each time, by the way, adding new details of his own authorship. Thus, in his story, Julia's wedding ring appeared on her finger. Then she cast a sensual, longing look at her ex-husband. Once in his story, John whispered, "I love you still," and let a stingy male tear. Another time, John exclaimed, "I don't want you anyway." In general, everyone in Pompeii knew that Grandpa Steve was a fictitious man, but how much everyone enjoyed listening to him. And just a couple of days later, another event took place. New owners came to the village again. Well, or rather a man from them. It was Julia's assistant, a young girl, dressed simply in jeans, a t-shirt, and a windbreaker jacket, glasses on her nose, red curly hair. This girl began to go around the yards and hand out sheets with descriptions of vacancies, which, as Julia promised, would soon be available at the restored enterprise, that is, in the revived farm. People took the leaflets, read them, and shook their heads incredulously. The offer was certainly interesting, but no one believed that this idea would work out. There is already a large farm next door, and how could such a competitor be outdone? Finally, she reached the plot. Her husband wasn't home and the flyer was taken by Natalie, the owner. And she was also shocked to hear from the red-haired girl, who, by the way, all presented to everyone a strange and beautiful name of Betty, that Julia offers to help with the repair of the roof, is ready to pay for the necessary building materials or the departure of a whole specialized team. Why such generosity? The landlady asked incredulously. No, thank you. We do not need alms. Wait. The red-haired girl jumped up like a scared squirrel. It's not about charity. You see, that's the thing. And Julia's assistant explained that the Stones had always been in good standing with the deceased farmer, so there was no sense in changing their opinion of their reputation. She recalled that Jacob had once helped his best employees at no cost, and now, just the new landlady had decided to continue that tradition. The helper also relayed that Julia was very much looking forward to having the Stones help her with the big job of rebuilding the farm. Barry would take care of the machinery. Hope would join the bookkeeping. Natalie listened very carefully and then said that she and her husband would have to think about it. She was ready to agree to it right away, but it would not be dignified, so she took some time to think about it. John was also taking time to think, but only for quite different reasons. He just could not understand. And at what moment, in fact, his life turned in the wrong direction, when he decided not to sell his father's business right away, but to try to pull it out on his own, or when he started taking out one loan after another, desperate to hold on a little longer, in the blind hope that everything would work itself out. It was an amazingly strange feeling, but over the past few years, John's life had become noticeably emptier, and the things that used to make him happy no longer mattered. Brand name clothes, new gadgets, dinners at cool restaurants, nightclubs. It wasn't the same. And then it became inaccessible to him. John more and more often caught himself thinking that his days were passing aimlessly, that he existed as if in a vacuum, for himself alone. And it was not that bad, but he only needed himself to be happy. And it was strange that lately he was thinking of Julia more and more often. He had been regretting all these years, as if under the effect of an emotional avalanche, that he had left her. Yes, the girl was strange, completely inexperienced, but, after all, not only for that very thing in the wife take. What about her kindness, her natural charm, her lively mind? But he, an idiot, failed to see all this and disgraced the poor girl in front of the whole village, threw her out, brought her back to her mother, as if she were defective goods, and then, he knew that Julia had been sent to some distant relatives in the city, and even though the first sprouts of regret had already arisen, John had not dared to look for her. Why? It was clear how she felt about him now. He deserved it, and now Julia was back in his life. What a woman she had become. Words were inadequate, emotions were overwhelming, but John held on. He gathered up the last shreds of pride and held on. Calmly, just a little haughty and certainly not showing that he cared about his ex-wife. He accepted Julia's terms that he could stay. He honestly began to fulfill his duties as her errand boy. No, she wasn't intentionally humiliating him. It wasn't in her nature at all, but she was making it clear how different they were now. And yet John hung in there. He helped to sort out the documentation of all the property, made sure that the hired workers plowed the field competently, and most importantly, correctly restored the greenhouses. In general, there was enough work. There was no time to be sad and feel sorry for themselves. Winter was approaching, and from one day to the next, all the work should be finished, and there a break until spring. No, in fact, there was enough work for the winter, because it was necessary to solve 1,000 issues in advance, for example, to choose seeds for sowing, and in advance to start choosing who to sell the future crop. And yet, how difficult it was. One day, when the first snow was already falling from the sky, Julia came again. The girl had long ago given up the extra escort car with security guards for what? In many ways, she was ready to agree with her uncle, but this excessive imagination a little irritated her. True, usually she was not against the escort in the person of Alexander, but not this time. The thing was that their relationship had changed recently, and it was beginning to seem to Julia more and more that Alexander cared for her. And the worst of all was that she cared for him too. Julia thought she just wasn't ready for a relationship, because there's studying to be done. Work. Just live. You don't have to do anything stupid. So she came alone this time. First of all, to visit my mom and grandparents. The old people were quite bad, tortured by chronic diseases, and Julia had to persuade them to agree to go to the city later for examination and treatment in a good private clinic. But with her mother, the communication was not so smooth. Selena, though in many ways had squandered her faith in all things mystical, but she didn't like the way her daughter had gotten close to Mickey. She didn't like the way Julia dressed too revealingly. Moreover, on her last visit, Selena had pissed Julia off by telling her that she'd seen Julia's father, Arnold. He's walking around pale and toothy. Mom, please, don't be crazy. Julia exclaimed and literally ran out of the house. What is this nonsense? It was clear to everyone Arnold was long gone in the world. This conversation must have stirred up her nerves so much that Julia suddenly felt the urgent need to talk to John about business matters. She knocked on the door of his house. He opened. At first, they talked normally about the planting season and pest control methods. But then John suddenly asked how she was. How was life? Julia, heated by the conversation with her mother, replied that everything was fine. Thanks to him, in time planted the idea of divorce. John also did not hold back and replied that if he was so disgusted with her, she would not talk to him, but would send a lawyer to negotiate. And that so far it looks like a hidden, disguised under the work together flirtation, because she is eager for him. What? Julia asked in shock. Are you out of your mind? Has everyone gone crazy today? That's what. You're the most insufferable person I've ever known. All right, you've done it. From now on, the only way we're gonna communicate is through my lawyers. And you're fired. Why would I be fired? John squinted at me. What did you do wrong? Everything, the girl exclaimed and jumped to her feet, running for the door. Ever since our first wedding night, everything has been wrong. Julia stopped in front of the car, threw back her head and stared up at the sky. Clear, studded with stars. You don't see such things in the city. She took a few deep breaths in and out. Calm down. She needed to calm down, and it would be better not to communicate with John personally anymore. As she turned onto the road leading from the village to the city, Julia finally regained her composure. She was about to turn on her favorite radio station so that she wouldn't doze off on the way. But then she noticed a man ahead of her. It was an old man standing by the roadside and stretched out his arm to catch a hitchhiker. In general, Julia was not in the habit of picking up strangers, but this old man, she suddenly thought that it must be some lonely pensioner. How could she pass by without caring? Moreover, the storm was coming, one of the last of the autumn thunderstorms, which it seemed in this weather might well turn into a blizzard. Good evening, Grandpa. Julia smiled amiably, pulling over and lowering the window. Hello, hello, he said in a squeaky but surprisingly deep and velvety voice. Their eyes met, and there was something in his eyes that Julia instantly realized the danger. Her hand was already reaching to close the windows and her feet to the gas pedal, but the stranger was more nimble than her, and his hand with its gnarled, broken fingernails swept toward the girl, grabbed her by the hair, and pushed her head forward. The girl's face, and especially her nose, collided with the steering wheel. Immediately, it became difficult to breathe. She wanted to scream to resist, but her desperate battle lasted a couple of minutes because the old man, with unexpected for such a puny body agility and strength, has already opened the car door from the inside and now strangled Julia, while continuing to push her head repeatedly with the dashboard. And finally, the world for her fell into blackness. That night, when people dared to interrupt his ritual, Arnold thought that the great Prince of Darkness and his ancestor, Dracula, had abandoned his faithful servant. He thought he would perish. But the forces of darkness came to the rescue as he survived while wandering in the woods, in the swamps. And then, well, skills, cunning and fortitude, all this he had in abundance. So he cleverly managed to get lost among the outcast, that is the homeless, and so wait for some time. And then, of course, had to hide. Arnold thought that all his labors went to waste, but then he found out something. He learned that she was his beautiful virgin victim, had a child with him. And that was a sign that the rite would be completed. And then, then he would be richly rewarded. It remained only to wait, but waited these long years. Arnold was not in the guise of a bum. He was found by one of the faithful old helpers. I don't care about those milk suckers who came to the sect only for material benefits. This man was an old assistant, serving the future incarnation of Dracula for the sake of his faith itself. And they began to wait. And finally, Julia entered the age, which according to mystical calculations on onyx stones and animal bones, was best suited for the rite. It was only a matter of finding out where the girl was and choosing the right moment to capture her. When the foolish girl stopped on the road, the calculation was right. She was so merciful. When she stopped, Arnold was not alone. His faithful assistant was lurking in the bushes. Yes, it was not very dignified for the servants of darkness to play hide and seek like this and make a masquerade. But what could be done? The former magnitude was not available. But everything had to pay off more than enough after the ritual. You want to reproach me for being a lousy husband? John opened the door. He expected to see Julia there, but it was her familiar assistant, Betty. Good evening, John said, losing his usual dashing attitude. Something wrong? It was easy to read the girl's face, eyes huge, breathing heavily. Julia's car. I was here on business too. I had to decide something with the field, how it will be winterized. The girl explained confusedly. And on the way back, I saw her car. On the road, the window was broken. Inside, Julia had been attacked. It looked like there was a struggle inside. What? John grabbed Betty by the shoulders. Did you call for help? Yeah, she nodded. But I came to you. Let's go check it out, shall we? By the time they get here, it'll be a while. Anything could happen to Julia in that time. Well, John didn't ponder for long, just grabbed his jacket from the coat rack and slipped his feet into his boots. On the run, they knocked to the other neighbors' stones and Sam explained to them quickly what had happened and soon all of them, in a crowd already, rushed to the road. The car was in place and one look was enough to realize that something very bad had happened here. On the ground, Sam said, shining his flashlights on the sides. 2 men, probably. Here are the tracks. Well, it looks like they lead that way. And he pointed to a grove nearby. It was a small grove, but the trees and bushes were so dense that nothing could be seen from the side. And yet, resolutely, the whole group rushed forward. Initially, Arnold planned to drag the girl away and take her away in his automobile, which was hidden behind the grove. And at first, everything went as it should. He and his assistant dragged her together. But then, his assistant suddenly stopped, said, I don't feel so good in my heart, and collapsed to the ground. Arnold was confused at first. Then he felt for a pulse. No pulse. He cursed. It seems that the forces of darkness had turned their backs on him if they had sent him such an ordeal. Arnold was quite strong for his age, but the years of wandering had not been in vain, and Julia weighed as much as a feather, so he realized at some point that he could not carry her any further. His back ached terribly, and Arnold remembered that in the heat of reverie about how he would perform the rite, he had forgotten to take painkillers. Oh, what a weak human body it was. Well, nothing. All that was left was to sacrifice the girl, and he would get a new body that would be as powerful as the one Dracula himself had once possessed. There was not much left, but suddenly Arnold heard a noise, and then, in the clearing where he stopped with his prey, suddenly people rushed out. Who's that old stump? Barry said. Get away from her now. Arnold straightened up, spread his legs and spread his feet, and grinned. He had no teeth of his own, but he wore a false jaw, and he had bought a jaw with fangs like a real vampire's, especially for the ritual, which he believed with all his heart could and should have become any minute now. But once again, something went wrong. Get away from her, you bastard! Sam shouted at the strange grandfather and stepped forward, swung the paddle threateningly, seizing it as a means of self-defense. Well, or attack thought, as the case may be. Fools, you can't stop the Prince of Darkness, Arnold shouted. The wind was getting stronger. The sky seemed quite low from behind the shaggy clouds, but there was no rain, no wet snow, no hail yet. She belongs to me. Arnold stood dangerously close to Julia, who was prostrate on the ground, and that was why those who had discovered the girl did not dare to come closer, for they feared that the old man might have some weapon with which to harm her. You can't stop me. I am the vessel for Dracula's coming. At one point, Arnold coughed. He's crazy, Barry said. At that moment, Julia on the ground moaned softly and stirred. The girl began to come out of a deep faint. She belongs to me, shrieked Arnold again, and then froze confusedly, because he remembered the dagger and all the other artifacts for the ritual were left there in his and his assistant's car. Don't you dare interfere with me, said Arnold menacingly, and tried to grab the girl again and drag her further. But then Sam, who had already assessed the situation, just threw the paddle on the ground and then simply walked up to the old man and sent him to the ground with a powerful short blow to the jaw. Rest, psychopath, Sam said and bent down, picking Julia up in his arms. That's when the rest of the 10 villagers, as well as Betty and John, rushed over to the missing woman. And after a couple more minutes, everyone heard the sound of sirens. Fortunately, Julia was not badly hurt. She had only a lot of bumps and bruises, cuts, but in general her health was not threatened. And yet the girl was left in the hospital for a day. Arnold, when he was able to get up, did not even try to resist, only shouted that stupid people do not understand anything and the coming of Dracula in this world cannot be stopped. The psychiatrist who took him in almost immediately said that apparently he finally developed schizophrenia. And it also became known that Arnold will probably now be placed in a clinic for the rest of his life. Arnold's assistant, as it turned out, died of a massive heart attack. A story that began more than 20 years ago has finally come to an end. However, much of it remained hidden from the inhabitants of Pompeii. Only John and Betty knew the whole truth. They were told about it by Mickey and Julia herself. Naturally, they were shocked by what they heard, but they promised and even swore that all this would remain between them. After all, it was clear that it was not necessary for all people to know about what had happened to Selena long ago, and it was not necessary for all people to know who Julia's father was. Yes, probably, many people would understand and would treat both women normally if they knew such things. And yet it was clear that it was better to keep some pages of the past closed. When Julia felt better, not mainly physically but emotionally, she wanted to talk to John. They met at Mickey's house. Julia said that first of all she wanted to apologize for how unkind she had been to John at first when she came with the documents. No, I'm the one who should apologize, and it remains to be seen if I should be forgiven, the boy smiled sadly. That's what I did back then. I just can't believe I was capable of it. Our marriage and everything else. Maybe it's time for us to forget the past and start again. Julia asked and took his hand. John froze. He thought she was talking about. No, I'm not talking about a romantic relationship. Julia laughed. Not at all. I actually already have someone. Alexander. He's my chauffeur and assistant, and now he's my fiancé, she said. That's good, John nodded. It's good that you were able to move in that direction. You're a wonderful girl, Julia. You're bound to be happy. You too, she smiled sincerely. Actually, I already have, John coughed. Betty and I. What? You and Betty? Julia's eyes widened. I never would have guessed. Well, we've been talking a lot lately, and then she asked me out on a date, and I've been hesitant to do it. I recognize Betty, Julia said. And then they talked some more about what to do about the household. They came to the conclusion that there was still plenty of room to return to the prosperity of Jacob's time. Julia offered Mickey a proper job as one of the managers. He accepted. He suddenly realized that this was his calling and destiny, to stay in Pompeii and do what his father had done. And John also somehow believed that the bad times were over for all of them and that only better things were ahead.